When food prices finish what inflation already started, and grocery store shelves become either empty or a luxury, the only families eating well will be the ones who knew these secrets months before the crisis hit. Not what the garden industry wants you to grow, not what the fertilizer aisle was built to sell you, what they replaced, buried, and quietly erased from mainstream growing, because self-sufficiency doesn't make anyone rich except you. 11 plants and soil secrets that have been quietly growing food forever. Calorie-dense, self-regenerating, and completely free from any supply chain once you understand how they work. Ancient knowledge, suppressed techniques, and underground growing methods that seed companies and fertilizer corporations would rather you never find. If you're watching this, you already sense something is wrong. So here's what you need to do right now. Hit subscribe, because by the time the rest of the world catches on, this information gets harder to find, and your neighbors will be on their third harvest from seeds and soil secrets they learned right here, while everyone else is still paying $9 for a dozen eggs. These 11 plants and soil secrets work across most of North America. Every single one was chosen because it checks every box. Beginner-friendly, calorie-dense, no electricity required to preserve, and completely self-sustaining year after year. Let's start with: there is a crop that yields more calories per acre than corn. It survives winters that kill potatoes. It withstands temperatures down to -30 degrees Celsius, and once you plant it, you never have to buy seed again. It replants itself forever. For thousands of years, indigenous nations cultivated it as a staple. Then we erased it, not because it failed, because it was too successful. A crop that grows without permission, feeds without cost, and spreads through underground networks cannot be controlled. And what cannot be controlled cannot be sold. Welcome to Silenced Seeds. Before we break this silence, if these stories matter to you, the best way to preserve this wisdom is simple. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share these seeds with those who need to remember what we forgot. The record opens along the eastern shores of North America in 1605. A French explorer named Samuel de Champlain lands on the coast of what would become Massachusetts. The Algonquin people welcome him with a feast. Among the dishes is a knobby root they call kaishukpanauk, the sun root. Champlain tastes it. He writes in his journal that it rivals the artichoke of Europe. He fills his ship with tubers and sails back to France. This is the sunchoke, Helianthus tuberosus, the perennial sunflower root native to central North America. Long before Champlain arrived, Native American nations knew its secret. The Iroquois told a story. When Earth Woman died giving birth to twin sons, Sapling and Flint, the first sunchokes grew from her feet, a crop born from sacrifice. The plant towers 8 to 10 feet tall, crowned with yellow sunflowers that follow the sun. But the treasure is invisible, buried beneath the soil. Knobby tubers store energy as inulin, not starch. Tribes from the Atlantic to the Great Plains planted it once and harvested forever. It spread through underground rhizomes like veins beneath the earth. One patch fed a village for generations. Genetic analysis published in 2014 confirmed the sunchoke represents one of the few crops independently domesticated in eastern North America. This was not foraging. This was agriculture. In 1805, Lewis and Clark nearly starved crossing the Dakotas. Sacagawea saved them. She found mouse caches, thousands of sunchokes gathered underground for winter. She dug them up, roasted them over fire, and fed the expedition. The tubers could be eaten raw, crisp like water chestnuts, or boiled until soft. They survived freezing, waiting in the ground, ready whenever hunger came. The yield is staggering. A single plant produces 75 to 200 tubers. An acre yields 16 to 25 tons. University trials in Oregon documented nearly 64,000 pounds per acre without irrigation. Compare that to potatoes at 53,000 pounds with irrigation. Sunchokes can produce more calories per acre than both potatoes and corn in cold climates. Now, consider the nutrition. Research published in 2024 documented the tuber contains up to 12% protein with a balanced amino acid profile. It contains more protein than soybeans, corn, wheat, or common beans. It delivers significant potassium, iron, copper, magnesium, and B vitamins. But the real power is inulin. The tubers contain 50 to 60% inulin by dry weight, one of the richest sources on Earth. Inulin is a prebiotic fiber that reaches your colon intact, where beneficial bacteria feast on it. They multiply and produce compounds that block pathogens and enhance mineral absorption. A 2020 review confirmed inulin from sunchokes promotes beneficial gut bacteria while supporting immune function. Potatoes spike blood sugar. Sunchokes do not. Because inulin is not metabolized like starch, it does not cause a glycemic surge. The plant that could help millions manage their blood sugar grows freely across 45 states. So what happened? When Champlain carried sunchokes to France, Europe was starving. The potato was feared. People believed it caused leprosy, but the sunchoke spread like salvation. The French called it topinambour. It fed peasants, livestock, even kings. No fertilizer, no care. Plant a tuber in spring and harvest in fall. Leave fragments in the ground, and next year a full crop appears. By the mid-1700s, cracks appeared. The tubers were small and knobby, difficult to clean, difficult to harvest by machine. They spoiled faster than potatoes, and the inulin caused gas in people unused to it. The potato won. Larger, smoother, easier to store. It fit the systems Europe had built. Warehouses, markets, tax collectors. The sunchoke fell, reduced to food for the poor and animal feed. In North America, settlers called it a weed. They preferred crops that required buying seed every year. Crops that could be controlled, taxed, and sold. Then came the wars. In France, in 1940, Nazi forces seized 80% of all food. Potatoes were sent to German soldiers. What remained for French families were scraps, topinambours, rutabagas, vegetables once fed to pigs. For 9 years, millions survived on sunchokes. They despised them, but they kept children alive when everything else was gone. In the Netherlands, the winter of 1944 became the hunger winter. 22,000 people died of starvation. Families dug frozen ground with bare hands looking for tubers. After liberation, survivors refused to eat them. An entire generation associated sunchokes with death, with occupation. The vegetable that saved millions became a symbol of suffering. It disappeared from markets, from cookbooks, from memory. But there is another reason the sunchoke stayed buried, one that has nothing to do with war. You cannot patent a sunchoke. It has been cultivated for thousands of years. It is public domain. You cannot sell herbicides for a crop that outcompetes weeds naturally. You cannot sell fertilizer for a plant that accesses deep nutrients through roots that penetrate several feet into the soil. You cannot create dependency when farmers can save their own tubers and replant them indefinitely. The entire economic model of modern agriculture requires crops that need constant inputs. Sunchokes represent everything that model opposes. They are free. They are resilient. They perpetuate themselves. Therefore, they had to be classified as weedy, difficult, unsuitable. Extension bulletins warn that sunchokes become invasive without acknowledging that invasive means successful. A plant that thrives without help is exactly what sustainable agriculture should look like. Instead, they teach farmers to see abundance as a problem. The global seed and fertilizer industry generates hundreds of billions of dollars annually by selling products farmers must purchase every year. That entire system relies on you forgetting that fertility can be grown, not bought. But the sunchoke never died. It just waited. In the 1960s, a produce wholesaler in California named Frida Kaplan stared at knobby tubers gathering dust. The name was killing it: Jerusalem artichoke. confusing. Wrong. She renamed it sunchoke and trademarked the name in 1980. She packaged it with recipes. Sales jumped 600%. Chefs discovered it. Nutty, sweet, crisp when raw, and creamy when cooked. In France, decades after the war, chefs reclaimed topinambour, les oublis, the forgotten vegetables. Not symbols of suffering anymore. Heritage. Today, climate models warn that rising temperatures will devastate wheat and corn yields in the coming decades. The crops feeding 8 billion people were bred for stability. That stability is ending. The sunchoke was born in chaos. It stores energy where drought cannot reach. It survives cold that kills potatoes. It produces more calories per acre than the world's most important grain crops. Research published in 2022 documented global cultivation now exceeds 2.5 million hectares. Scientists are studying it for marginal lands, for biofuel production, for sustainable food systems that do not depend on fossil fuels. You can grow what they silenced. Plant tubers 3 to 4 inches deep in early spring or fall. They thrive in almost any soil. In 6 to 8 months, you will harvest your first crop. Leave a few tubers in the ground and they return every year, for decades. One planting, lifetime harvests. No seed company, no fertilizer dealer, no permission required. The same roots that fed indigenous nations for millennia, that sustained Lewis and Clark, that kept French children alive during occupation, still grow wild across most of North America. They never disappeared from the land. They disappeared from our memory. When you plant sunchokes this spring, you will participate in a quiet rebellion. Food that does not need a corporation. Food that does not need a supply chain. Food that just grows. In the 1960s, British agricultural trials documented something that should not exist. 100 tons of green matter per acre, year after year, on soil so depleted that other crops failed entirely. The plant was cut 5 times in a single season, regrowing to full height in just 4 weeks. It required no fertilizer because it was fertilizer. Laboratory analysis confirmed decomposition rates that defied every known measurement. While other plants take weeks to release nutrients, this one melts into the soil in 48 hours. A $230 billion industry could not allow this to continue. This is comfrey, a plant that creates infinite fertilizer from nothing but sunlight and deep earth. And the story of how it was silenced reveals exactly who controls what grows in your garden. Welcome to Silenced Seeds. The record opens in 90 AD in the writings of a Greek physician named Dioscorides. In his medical text, Materia Medica, which remained Europe's primary reference for 1,500 years, he documented a plant with sticky roots that could mend broken bones. The Greek name symphyton translates literally as to make grow together. Pliny the Elder tested it. He boiled the roots into adhesive paste and used it to stick pieces of raw meat together. The bond held. For 2,000 years, Europeans called it knit bone. Healers wrapped fractured limbs with comfrey poultices. But in 1845, one man discovered its true potential, and it had nothing to do with medicine. Henry Doubleday was a poor Quaker living in Essex when the Irish potato famine struck. 1 million people starved while he watched, helpless. The images haunted him. He had failed at manufacturing starch. He had failed at producing glue for postage stamps. But he refused to stop searching for something that could prevent future famine. In the 1850s, he wrote to the royal palace in St. Petersburg requesting a specific Russian variety of comfrey. What arrived was something else entirely. An accidental cross. An F1 hybrid exhibiting genetic vigor neither parent possessed. Doubleday abandoned his other pursuits immediately. This plant produced yields no one had ever documented. 100 tons per acre on marginal land. He spent the next 30 years researching comfrey as the answer to hunger itself. He died at 92, still poor, still devoted to the plant he believed could feed the world. Then tragedy erased his work. His family burned all his notes. 30 years of yield data, cultivation techniques, and nutritional analyses vanished into ash. For decades, the knowledge slept. In 1948, a young horticulturist named Lawrence Hills discovered Doubleday's forgotten story and decided to finish what the Quaker had started. Hills founded the Henry Doubleday Research Association, collected comfrey strains from across Britain, and grew 21 varieties side by side. He tested every claim, and he documented what the fire had destroyed. By the early 1960s, one strain dominated every metric: Bocking 14. It was sterile and produced no invasive seeds. It resisted disease, and it delivered the highest nutrient content of any comfrey ever tested. Then Hills did something the fertilizer industry could not comprehend. He refused to patent it. Instead, he mailed root cuttings for free to anyone who requested them: gardeners in England, farmers in Africa, experimenters in America. By the time Hills retired, Bocking 14 was growing on 6 continents. What made comfrey so dangerous to an industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars? The numbers tell the story. Fresh comfrey leaves contain over 7% potassium. Farmyard manure rarely exceeds 1.5%. Comfrey delivers nearly 5 times that concentration. But the decomposition rate is where everything changes. Most green manures sit in compost heaps for weeks before releasing nutrients. Alfalfa takes time. Clover takes time. Grass clippings take time. Comfrey's low fiber content means microbes devour the leaves in 48 hours. Toss fresh comfrey onto a stalled compost pile, and within hours the temperature spikes. The material transforms into black, nutrient-rich humus while other crops are still intact. The secret lies underground. Comfrey roots penetrate 10 feet into the soil, far beyond where vegetables and grains can reach. Those roots function as biological mining drills, pulling potassium, calcium, and phosphorus from deep subsoil and concentrating them in the leaves. When you cut the plant, you bring deep earth minerals to the surface. It is a nutrient pump that runs on nothing but rain and time. Cut comfrey at 2 feet tall. 4 weeks later, it regrows to full height. 5 harvests per season. 20 tons per harvest. 100 tons annually, for 20 years from a single planting. No fertilizer input required, because the plant is the fertilizer. So what happened? The global fertilizer industry generates over $230 billion a year. It depends on farmers purchasing nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in bags every single year, forever. The entire economic model requires crops that need constant inputs. Comfrey represents everything that model cannot tolerate. You plant comfrey once, you harvest for 2 decades. You need no synthetic nitrogen because comfrey's deep roots access nutrients other plants cannot reach. You need no irrigation after establishment because 10-foot taproots find water tables. You need no annual purchase. Ever. If every farmer had followed Henry Doubleday's research, the synthetic fertilizer industry would have lost its foothold before it began. If every gardener in the 1950s had planted Bocking 14, commercial fertilizer sales would have collapsed, and the industry knew it. On July 6, 2001, the Food and Drug Administration issued a warning. Manufacturers were advised to remove comfrey dietary supplements from the market. The stated reason was legitimate. Comfrey roots contain pyrrolizidine alkaloids, compounds that can cause liver damage if ingested in large quantities over extended periods. The agency banned supplements for internal use, pills, teas, capsules, but the headlines did not make that distinction. Garden centers saw the word toxic and stopped stocking comfrey entirely. Nurseries refused to carry it. The public heard liver damage and assumed the plant was dangerous to touch, to grow, or to have anywhere near their families. No one explained that using comfrey as fertilizer poses zero risk to humans. No one explained that soil microbes break down the alkaloids rapidly. No one explained that the ban applied only to eating concentrated root extracts, not to growing the plant in your garden. The result was surgical. Comfrey vanished from mainstream gardening within 5 years. The plant Lawrence Hills spent 40 years promoting disappeared from commerce almost overnight. The timing is worth noting. In 2001, natural gas prices were climbing. The fertilizer industry was consolidating into massive conglomerates, companies whose entire revenue stream depends on farmers remaining dependent. And suddenly, the one plant that offered permanent independence from purchased inputs was declared too dangerous to sell. Comfrey cannot be patented. It cannot be genetically modified to require annual purchases. It cannot be controlled because it grows from a single root fragment. Lawrence Hills understood this. That is why he gave it away for free. He knew that for comfrey to survive corporate suppression, it had to be decentralized and impossible to monopolize, passed hand to hand between gardeners who understood its value. But it survived. The knowledge never died. Walk through any permaculture garden today, and you will find Bocking 14 growing in a corner, producing fertilizer that costs nothing. Root cuttings still pass between gardeners like quiet contraband. The plant Henry Doubleday found after the famine persists exactly as he predicted. Unkillable, unstoppable, waiting for the moment when dependence becomes too expensive. Established comfrey survives temperatures down to -30 degrees Celsius. It tolerates drought. It thrives on marginal land. And because Bocking 14 is sterile, it never spreads beyond where you plant it. Controlled abundance. Infinite fertility. For 20 years from one planting. Use the leaves as mulch around tomatoes and watch them thrive. Steep the leaves in water for 3 weeks to create liquid fertilizer that outperforms anything in a bottle. Layer fresh comfrey into compost piles to accelerate decomposition. The plant solves fertility without purchasing anything. Free. A $230 billion industry spent over a century making sure you never learned this. They convinced the world that fertility comes in bags, that food production requires annual purchases, that gardeners cannot produce what corporations sell. Every bag of fertilizer you buy is profit extracted from knowledge that was deliberately suppressed. But now you know. You can grow what they silenced. Plant root cuttings in spring, 6 inches apart, in any soil. Within 2 years, you will have a permanent source of free fertilizer that outlasts any product on any shelf. The plant that creates infinite fertility from nothing but sunlight and deep earth never stopped offering its gifts. It simply waited for gardeners willing to remember. We are counting down 10 healing herbs that can turn your backyard into a proven medicine cabinet. From ancient battlefield remedies to plants now backed by clinical trials, these entries include fast-acting first aid, natural anxiety relief, immune boosters, and remedies for everyday aches you never thought you could grow. Which homegrown healer claims the #1 spot? Let us begin, starting with number 10. In 10th place, Calendula brings centuries of battlefield wisdom straight to your backyard. Medieval soldiers knew it as the war flower. They packed dried petals into wounds to speed recovery. Today, clinical trials confirm Calendula speeds healing in burns and surgical incisions, thanks to triterpenoids and flavonoids that fight bacteria and reduce inflammation. Growing calendula is simple. Sow seeds in early spring and watch vibrant orange blooms appear through the first frost. To make a classic salve, infuse dried flowers in olive oil, then blend with beeswax until you have a thick, golden ointment. This remedy is for external use only. A quick patch test is wise for anyone with ragweed allergies. With its proven track record and easy care, calendula turns a sunny corner of your garden into a first aid kit ready for cuts, scrapes, and everyday mishaps. Plantain hides in plain sight, thriving underfoot on lawns, sidewalks, and trails. Native Americans called it the white man's footprint because it spread wherever settlers traveled. What looks like a weed is actually a powerful first aid resource. Clinical trials found plantain ointment healed second-degree burns faster and better than standard medical treatments. The secret lies in compounds like orcubin and allantoin, which calm inflammation and spark new cell growth. For generations, the simplest remedy has been to chew a fresh leaf briefly and press the mash onto cuts, stings, or bites. Nature's own bandage ready within arm's reach. Broad, ribbed leaves make plantain easy to spot, and as a perennial, it returns year after year without planting. While its reach is humble, plantain turns any patch of green into a living medicine chest, proving wild plants can be the most accessible healers of all. 8th place belongs to lemon balm, a mint family perennial once called the elixir of life by ancient Greeks. For over 2,000 years, its fragrant lemon-scented leaves have been brewed to calm nerves and lift spirits. Modern clinical trials back up the old wisdom. Lemon balm reduces anxiety and improves sleep, without the grogginess of pharmaceuticals. The secret lies in rosmarinic acid, a compound that interacts with GABA receptors in the brain, much like prescription anti-anxiety medications. Studies show daily doses between 300 and 1,600 milligrams can ease anxious thoughts and help restless sleepers find deeper rest. Lemon balm thrives in sun or partial shade, spreading gently in the garden. To make a soothing tea, simply steep a handful of fresh leaves in hot water. For a longer-lasting remedy, infuse chopped leaves in vodka, shake daily, and strain after 4 weeks for a gentle tincture that brings calm when needed. Number 7. Elderflower earned its reputation as the medicine chest of medieval Europe, relied on for breaking fevers and easing respiratory distress. Today, science confirms that legacy. Clinical trials on elderberry syrup, made from the cooked berries of the same shrub, show flu symptoms resolve 2 to 4 days faster than with standard care. Flavonoids in elderberry support the immune system and help reduce congestion, making this shrub a powerful ally during cold and flu season. To prepare a safe syrup, simmer the berries for at least 45 minutes. This step destroys natural toxins found in raw fruit and seeds. Plant bare-root elder shrubs early in spring, and by early summer, clouds of white flowers appear, followed by rich, dark berries in fall. With careful preparation, elderflower and elderberry can transform a backyard corner into an effective, time-tested remedy for acute illness. Number 6. Feverfew stands out as a true migraine preventive, not just a quick fix. For centuries, this daisy-like perennial has been relied on for stubborn headaches, and it is modern clinical trials that confirm its power. Study after study shows that daily use of feverfew, either as fresh leaves or as a standardized extract, can cut the frequency and intensity of migraines, while also easing nausea and sensitivity to light. The active compound parthenolide works by stopping the blood vessel spasms that trigger attacks. That makes feverfew most effective when taken every day over several weeks. Its cheerful flowers self-seed easily, so one planting can keep a garden supplied for years. But this remedy is not for everyone. Feverfew should never be used during pregnancy, and some people may develop mouth ulcers with prolonged use. For those managing chronic migraines, Feverfew offers a science-backed, garden-grown path to fewer sick days and a clearer head. Number 5. Lavender brings together ancient ritual and modern science in a single fragrant stem. The Romans prized it for both washing and healing. Its name comes from lavare, which means to wash, and they infused baths and sick rooms with its calming scent. Today, clinical trials show lavender oil can ease anxiety and improve sleep as effectively as some prescription medications without the side effects. Linalool and linalool acetate, the main compounds in lavender, interact with the nervous system to calm the mind and help wounds heal faster. For minor burns or cuts, diluted lavender oil speeds recovery, but always patch test first to avoid rare skin reactions. This Mediterranean perennial thrives even in poor, dry soil and rewards gardeners with spikes of purple flowers all summer. A word of caution: nearly half of retail lavender oils are adulterated, so look for purity tested by gas chromatography mass spectrometry before using lavender in remedies. With versatility proven by both history and research, lavender earns its place at the heart of any backyard pharmacy. Number 4. Yarrow has earned its reputation as the soldier's herb, with roots reaching back to ancient Greece. Legend holds that Achilles used yarrow to treat battlefield wounds, and its scientific name, Achillea millefolium, keeps that story alive. Modern research confirms that yarrow's leaves and flowers contain a powerful mix of tannins, flavonoids, and volatile oils, compounds that help stop bleeding, fight infection, and speed up healing. In emergencies, a fresh yarrow leaf, crushed and pressed onto a cut, acts as a natural styptic, stemming blood flow and protecting against microbes. Unlike most garden plants, yarrow thrives in dry, poor soil and spreads easily, producing clusters of white or pink flowers year after year. Sustainable harvesting means leaving at least half the patch untouched, ensuring wild stands remain healthy. With its rare combination of hemostatic and antimicrobial action, yarrow stands out as the go-to herb for high-stakes first aid in any backyard pharmacy. Coming to the top 3, Echinacea stands as the immune booster, rooted in Great Plains indigenous medicine. For centuries, tribal healers relied on Echinacea root at the very first sign of illness. That practice is now backed by meta-analyses showing colds resolve up to 1.5 days sooner and with milder symptoms when Echinacea is started at the first scratchy throat. The power comes from alkamides and polysaccharides that modulate immune response, strengthening defenses without overstimulation. Clinical guidelines emphasize timing. Echinacea works best as a tincture or tea taken right at the onset of symptoms, not as a daily supplement. As a garden perennial, Echinacea's purple-pink blooms attract pollinators all summer. Ethical gardeners should source seeds or roots from suppliers that benefit indigenous communities. Those with autoimmune conditions or on immunosuppressants should consult a doctor before use, as Echinacea's immune effects are potent and not for everyone. In second place, mullein stands tall as the lung's best friend, a reputation earned in folk medicine and now supported by science. This dramatic biennial starts with a rosette of large, fuzzy leaves in its first year, then sends up a towering spike of yellow flowers in its second. Mullein's leaves contain saponins, natural compounds that act as expectorants, helping to loosen and clear mucus from the chest, instead of just suppressing a cough. Pharmacological reviews confirm mullein's anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial effects, making it especially useful during cold and flu season. The safest way to use mullein for respiratory relief is a steam. Pour boiling water over dried leaves, tent your head with a towel, and inhale deeply for 5 to 10 minutes. Always strain out the tiny leaf hairs, because they can irritate sensitive lungs if inhaled. With its easy growth and practical benefits, mullein offers accessible, effective support for anyone looking to breathe easier, straight from the garden. And finally, in first place, chamomile stands as the ancient essential for mind and body. Used for more than 5,000 years, from Egyptian temples to medieval gardens, chamomile's gentle white and yellow flowers have earned a reputation for soothing sleep, calming anxiety, and easing digestive discomfort. Clinical studies confirm what tradition has long claimed. Apigenin, bisabolol, and chamazulene in chamomile interact with GABA receptors in the brain, reducing anxiety and promoting restful sleep, while also calming inflammation in the gut. A nightly cup of chamomile tea is simple. Steep 2 teaspoons of dried flowers in boiling water, cover the cup, and let it sit for 5 minutes. This annual grows quickly from seed sown in early spring, and it self-seeds for years to come. Those with ragweed allergies should proceed with caution, because cross-reactions can occur. Chamomile's versatility, rapid growth, and evidence-backed benefits make it the most practical and time-honored herb to anchor any backyard pharmacy. Across all 10 entries, one pattern stands out. Nature's most effective medicine is often humble, homegrown, and proven by both tradition and science. In 1933, at the height of the Great Depression, a family in Detroit grew more food in their backyard than 90% of American suburban families grow today. They had no irrigation system, no chemical fertilizer, no seed subscription, no app telling them when to water. They had dirt, scraps, and knowledge that their grandparents carried from the old country. That single backyard produced over 800 pounds of vegetables in one season. It was exposed to the same sun, the same rain, the same soil as the house next door today, which grows nothing but lawn. Between 1930 and 1945, more than 20 million American families turned their yards into food production. At the peak, home gardens produced 40% of all vegetables consumed in the United States. 40%. Not from industrial farms, not from refrigerated trucks crossing the country, from backyards, vacant lots, and rooftops, from soil that Americans had learned to feed instead of deplete. Then, over the next 50 years, that knowledge almost completely disappeared. Not because it stopped working, not because science disproved it, but because a $200 billion industry needed you to forget that soil can feed itself. They needed you to believe that fertility comes in bags, that harvest requires purchase, that the ground beneath your feet is dead unless you buy what they sell. This is the story of Depression-era soil secrets, the methods that tripled harvests without a single dollar spent on inputs, and the 90-year campaign to make sure you never learned them. The record opens in the spring of 1931 in vacant lots across American cities. The economy had collapsed. Banks had failed. Unemployment had reached 25%. Families who had worked factory jobs for decades suddenly had no income, no savings, and no way to feed their children. But they had land. Abandoned lots, unused corners of parks, strips of dirt between tenements. And they had memory. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration recognized something that modern policy has forgotten. When people cannot buy food, they can grow it, but only if they know how. In 1933, the agency began funding what they called relief gardens. Some cities called them welfare gardens or subsistence gardens. The names varied. The purpose did not. Transform unemployed workers into food producers. Transform dead urban soil into living systems. In Detroit alone, the city mapped over 40,000 vacant lots and offered them to families for free. Thayer Street Garden became one of the most productive urban farms in American history. Families who had never grown a tomato in their lives were suddenly feeding themselves from April through October. The program spread. Chicago, New York, Cleveland, Philadelphia. By 1934, relief garden programs operated in every major American city. But the gardens worked only because the soil worked. And the soil worked only because the gardeners remembered something. Fertility is not purchased, it is built. Agricultural bulletins from 1932 called compost the poor man's fertilizer. Extension agents taught families to dig pits behind their houses, to layer kitchen scraps with dried leaves, and to turn the pile every few weeks. Within 60 days, that pile became black gold. It was humus so rich it smelled like the forest floor. Gardeners spread it an inch thick over their plots each spring. They did not buy nitrogen. They did not buy phosphorus. They did not buy potassium. They built all three from materials that cost nothing. The science behind this was not new. European farmers had composted for centuries. Asian rice paddies had cycled organic matter for millennia. But in Depression-era America, composting became survival technology. A family with a compost pile could grow twice the harvest of a family without one. The difference was not luck. It was biology. When you add compost to soil, you are not just adding nutrients. You are adding life. 1 teaspoon of healthy compost contains more than 1 billion bacteria, several yards of fungal threads, thousands of protozoa, and dozens of nematodes. These organisms do not just sit in the soil. They work. Bacteria break down organic matter and release nitrogen in forms that plant roots can absorb. Fungi extend root systems by a factor of 10, reaching water and minerals that roots alone could never find. Protozoa eat bacteria and excrete nitrogen in plant-available form. The entire system cycles nutrients continuously, without any input from the gardener after the initial addition. Depression-era families did not have microscopes. They did not know the names of soil bacteria, but they knew the results. Plots fed with compost produced more. Plots fed with compost survived drought better. Plots fed with compost resisted disease. The evidence was in the harvest, and the harvest did not lie. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration documented these results systematically. Garden supervisors in city after city reported the same pattern. Families who composted outproduced families who did not by margins of 50%. Sometimes 100%, sometimes more. One report from Cleveland noted that demonstration plots using only compost yielded 3 times the vegetables of adjacent plots using no amendments at all. 3 times. That number appears again and again in the records, not because it was propaganda, because it was true. But composting was only one piece of the system. Depression-era gardeners understood something else that modern agriculture has systematically forgotten. The harvest does not end when you pick the vegetable. It ends when winter does. And without refrigeration, without canning equipment, without freezers, how do you keep food from September to April? The answer had been standing in American backyards for 300 years. Root cellars. A root cellar is nothing more than a hole in the ground with a roof. It uses the Earth's stable temperature, typically between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit at depth, to create natural cold storage. No electricity, no machinery, just physics. Before the rural electrification programs of the 1930s, most American farms had no access to refrigeration. Yet families ate vegetables through the winter. The root cellar made it possible. Depression-era families knew exactly which crops stored best. Potatoes could last 6 months in a properly managed cellar. Carrots buried in sand lasted 4 months. Beets, turnips, parsnips, and rutabagas all survived the winter underground. Cabbages wrapped in newspaper kept until March. Onions braided and hung from the ceiling lasted until spring planting. The Woodstock History Center documented that root cellars experienced a major revival during the Great Depression and World War II. Families who had abandoned the old ways suddenly remembered them. The Farm Security Administration actively encouraged root cellar construction. Extension bulletins explained proper ventilation, humidity control, and storage techniques. A family with a root cellar and a productive garden could eat fresh vegetables 12 months a year without spending $1 on groceries. But root cellars required a specific kind of gardening. You could not store hybrid tomatoes. You could not store lettuce. You could not store most of the crops that modern seed catalogs emphasize. You had to grow for storage. That meant root vegetables. That meant winter squash. That meant cabbages and onions. Depression-era gardens looked nothing like modern suburban gardens. They were designed for survival, not salads. This is a detail that matters. When families grew for storage, they selected varieties that had been bred for keeping quality over centuries. These were not the tender, sweet, quick-maturing varieties that modern breeders favor. These were tough, dense, sometimes homely vegetables that could sit in a cold cellar for months without rotting. They were survivors, and the families who grew them became survivors too. The gardeners also saved seed. This practice seems obvious until you realize how completely it has vanished. Today, most American gardeners buy new seed every spring. They do so without questioning why. Depression-era families would have found this incomprehensible. Seed was not a product. Seed was inheritance. When you save seed from your own garden, you are not just preserving genetics. You are adapting. Every generation of seed saved from your plot becomes slightly better suited to your soil, your climate, your microenvironment. Tomatoes saved for 10 generations from the same garden will outperform store-bought seed in that specific garden. The plant learns. The gardener teaches by selection. Depression-era families understood this intuitively. They saved seed from their best plants. They traded seed with neighbors. They formed what modern researchers now call seed-saving circles, informal networks of gardeners exchanging genetic material and knowledge. A family in Ohio might trade bean seed with a cousin in Pennsylvania. Both families benefited from the other's selections. Both families strengthened their local food security. The Seed Savers Exchange, founded in 1975, documented this history extensively. The founders began their work after receiving seeds that had been carried from Bavaria in the 1870s and passed down through 4 generations of an Iowa farm family. Those seeds had survived 100 years of American agriculture, not because they were commercially valuable, but because they were irreplaceable. When Diane Ott Wheely's grandfather gave her those seeds on his deathbed, he was not giving her a product. He was giving her survival. During the Depression, this kind of inheritance was common. Families guarded their best seed varieties the way they guarded land deeds. A good strain of pole bean or winter squash was wealth. It could not be repossessed. It could not be inflated away. It could not be taxed. It just kept producing, year after year, asking nothing but sun and water and someone to save the seed. Now, let us talk about the fields. Not backyard gardens, but the farms. Because the same years that saw urban families turn vacant lots into vegetable plots also saw rural America face the greatest agricultural catastrophe in its history, the Dust Bowl. Between 1930 and 1940, severe drought, combined with decades of poor farming practices, turned the Great Plains into a wasteland. Topsoil that had accumulated over 10,000 years blew away in massive dust storms. Black blizzards darkened skies from Texas to Chicago. Farms that had produced abundant wheat for generations became barren hardpan. Families abandoned their land by the hundreds of thousands. But not all farms failed. Some farmers had adopted different methods, and those methods made all the difference. The practices that saved farms during the Dust Bowl have names that sound technical: strip fallow, contour plowing, stubble mulching, windbreak planting. But the principles beneath them are simple. Do not leave soil bare. Do not remove all organic matter. Do not break the structure that holds earth in place. Strip fallow meant alternating planted strips with fallow strips, so that bare ground was always protected by adjacent vegetation. Contour plowing meant following the natural curves of the land instead of plowing straight rows so that water infiltrated instead of running off. Stubble mulching meant leaving crop residue on the surface instead of plowing it under so that the ground stayed covered through winter. Windbreak planting meant establishing rows of trees to slow wind and trap moisture. A working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research examined these practices in detail. Researchers found that farms using strip fallow and stubble mulching retained significantly more soil moisture than farms using conventional methods. During drought years, this moisture retention translated directly into yield differences. Farms that kept organic matter on the surface produced crops. Farms that plowed it under produced dust. By 1938, the Soil Conservation Service reported that combined conservation practices had reduced blowing soil by 65% across participating farms. 65%. In regions where neighbors were abandoning their land entirely, farms using these methods survived. The NBER research also documented something more subtle. Farms with higher organic matter in their soil resisted drought better across all conditions. Organic matter acts like a sponge, absorbing water when it rains and releasing it slowly to plant roots during dry periods. A soil with 5% organic matter can hold roughly twice as much water as a soil with 2% organic matter. During the Dust Bowl, that difference determined whether a farm survived or blew away. This was not new science. Farmers had known for centuries that adding manure, compost, and crop residues improved soil. But the cheap availability of synthetic fertilizer in the early 20th century had led many farmers to abandon these practices. Why bother building soil when you could just add chemicals? The Dust Bowl answered that question brutally. You bother because chemicals cannot hold soil together. Only organic matter can. So what happened? Why did these methods not become the foundation of American agriculture? Why did 20 million relief gardens vanish? Why did root cellars become curiosities? Why did seed saving become a fringe hobby instead of common practice? Why did the soil building techniques that saved Dust Bowl farms become footnotes instead of standards? The answer begins with a German chemist and a process that may have saved 1 billion lives while simultaneously destroying the foundation of sustainable agriculture. In 1909, Fritz Haber demonstrated that nitrogen could be synthesized from air using high pressure and a catalyst. The Haber-Bosch process, later scaled up by Carl Bosch, made industrial production of ammonia possible for the first time. Before that invention, all nitrogen fertilizer came from organic sources: manure, compost, guano, and legume rotation. After the invention, nitrogen could be manufactured in factories. The immediate application was explosives. World War I consumed unprecedented quantities of ammunition, and the Haber-Bosch process made Germany's munitions independence possible. But after the war, those same factories needed new markets. They found them in agriculture. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizer hit American farms in earnest during the 1920s. At first, it supplemented organic methods. Farmers used chemical nitrogen alongside manure and compost, but over time, a shift occurred. Why maintain a compost pile when you could spread granules from a bag? Why manage a rotation when you could just add more nitrogen? The chemical approach was simpler, faster, and seemed to work just as well. After World War II, the shift accelerated dramatically. Munitions factories again needed peacetime markets. The same ammonium nitrate used in bombs became the foundation of agricultural fertility. The price dropped. Availability exploded. Extension services, increasingly funded by chemical companies, began teaching farmers that synthetic fertilizer was not just an option, but a necessity. Here is the logic that drove the transition. Compost is free. You make it from waste materials that would otherwise rot in a pile. A farmer who masters composting never needs to buy fertility again. That farmer is self-sufficient. That farmer represents $0 of recurring revenue. Synthetic fertilizer is purchased every season, every year, forever. A farmer dependent on synthetic fertilizer represents guaranteed income. Multiply that by millions of farms, and you have a $200 billion global industry. An industry that cannot exist if farmers remember how to build soil themselves. The fertilizer industry did not conspire in smoky rooms to suppress composting knowledge. They did not need to. They simply invested. They funded university research. They sponsored extension programs. They provided curriculum materials to agricultural schools. They bought advertising in farm journals. And slowly, steadily, over decades, the message shifted. The new message said, fertility comes in bags. The new message said, soil is just a medium to hold roots while chemicals do the real work. The new message said, modern farming means purchased inputs. The old knowledge, the Depression-era knowledge, the knowledge that soil could feed itself if you fed it first, became quaint. Then obsolete, then forgotten. The campaign to erase soil wisdom operated on multiple fronts simultaneously. First, the seed industry transformed. Before the 1930s, most farmers saved their own seed. By 1960, hybrid corn dominated American agriculture. Hybrid seeds produce excellent first-generation crops, but do not breed true. Save seed from a hybrid, and next year's crop will be inferior, variable, unpredictable. To get consistent results, you must buy new hybrid seed every year. This was presented as progress. Hybrid vigor increased yields. That part was true. But hybrid dependence also broke the cycle of seed saving that had sustained agriculture for 10,000 years. Farmers who once selected their own seed became customers who returned every spring, checkbook in hand. Second, the extension service shifted focus. Land-grant universities, established to serve farmers, increasingly served the industries that funded their research. Studies on organic soil management declined. Studies on chemical optimization multiplied. A young farmer attending extension meetings in 1955 heard about nitrogen application rates, not compost ratios, about herbicide timing, not mulching techniques, about the latest hybrid varieties, not seed saving. Third, the infrastructure changed. Small-scale food preservation equipment became hard to find. Local seed exchanges faded. Root cellar construction knowledge passed out of common practice. Farmers' markets, once central to local food economies, were displaced by supermarket chains with national supply networks. The entire system that had supported Depression-era self-sufficiency was dismantled piece by piece. None of this required conspiracy. It only required economics. Every step that increased farmer dependence increased corporate revenue. Every step that preserved farmer independence threatened corporate revenue. The system selected for dependence the way evolution selects for survival, not through intent, but through pressure. By 1980, the transformation was nearly complete. Most American farmers had never made compost. Most had never saved seed. Most had never seen a root cellar in use. Most believed, because they had been taught to believe, that modern agriculture required modern inputs, that high yields demanded high purchases, that the old ways were not just outdated but impossible. The results of this transformation are now visible across American farmland. Start with the soil. In 1930, American topsoil averaged approximately 12 inches deep across the Midwest. Today, that average has dropped to 6 inches. Half the topsoil is gone, washed into rivers, blown into the atmosphere, hauled away by erosion that organic matter would have prevented. The USDA estimates that American farmland loses nearly 2 billion tons of topsoil each year. Billion with a B. Topsoil that accumulated over thousands of years, lost in decades. And what replaces it? Nothing. You cannot manufacture topsoil in a factory. You cannot buy it by the truckload. It builds only through the slow accumulation of organic matter, the same process that Depression-era farmers understood intuitively. Next, consider the carbon. Healthy soil stores enormous quantities of carbon in organic matter. When you plow soil and leave it bare, that carbon oxidizes into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. American farmland has released approximately 50% of its stored carbon since industrial agriculture began. The soil that once acted as a carbon bank now acts as a carbon source. Then the water. Soil rich in organic matter absorbs water like a sponge. Soil depleted of organic matter sheds water like concrete. During heavy rains, depleted soil floods. During droughts, depleted soil bakes. Farmers compensate with irrigation, pumping fossil water from aquifers that are not recharging. The Ogallala Aquifer, which underlies much of the Great Plains breadbasket, is dropping by more than a foot per year in some regions. When it empties, nothing will replace it. And the nutrients themselves. Synthetic fertilizer provides nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. 3 elements. But plants need at least 17 elements for optimal health. Healthy soil, soil alive with microorganisms, provides all of them. Depleted soil provides only what you add. Crops grown in depleted soil are measurably less nutritious than crops grown in healthy soil. Studies have documented declining mineral content in vegetables over the past 70 years. Your grandmother's tomato contained more nutrition than yours, not because the variety changed, because the soil changed. The irony is brutal. Industrial agriculture promised higher yields, and for decades it delivered them. But those yields came by mining the soil, not building it. We have been eating the seed corn, spending the principal instead of living on the interest. And now the bills are coming due. But the knowledge survived. Not in laboratories, not in extension bulletins, not in agricultural colleges. It survived in the margins, in the memories of stubborn grandparents who refused to stop composting, in immigrant communities that carried old world practices to new world gardens, in the deliberately preserved seed lines of organizations like Seed Savers Exchange, in the quietly persistent root cellars of families who never stopped using them. In 1975, Diane Ott Wheely and Kent Wheely founded the Seed Savers Exchange with a simple mission: prevent the extinction of heirloom vegetable varieties. They began with those Bavarian seeds from Diane's grandfather. By 2000, the organization maintained over 20,000 varieties, many saved by families who had grown them for generations. These were varieties the commercial seed industry had abandoned because they could not be patented, could not be hybridized, could not generate recurring revenue. Each variety in that collection carries survival information. These are not ornamental curiosities. They are proven performers, selected over decades or centuries for disease resistance, drought tolerance, storage quality, and flavor. These varieties still remember how to thrive without chemical support because they never learned to depend on it. The modern organic farming movement built on this foundation. When Robert Rodale began publishing Organic Gardening magazine in the 1940s, he was not inventing new techniques. He was preserving old ones. When permaculture pioneers Bill Mollison and David Holmgren codified design principles in the 1970s, they were systematizing what traditional cultures had known for millennia. The knowledge was not created, it was remembered. And now, the remembering is accelerating. Community gardens are returning to American cities. Detroit, which led relief garden programs in the 1930s, now hosts over 1,500 community gardens and urban farms. Farmers' markets have grown from fewer than 2,000 in 1994 to more than 9,000 today. Seed libraries operate in public libraries across the country, allowing patrons to check out seeds the way they check out books. The USDA, which spent decades promoting chemical agriculture, has begun shifting its message. The Conservation Stewardship Program now includes support for cover cropping, reduced tillage, and organic matter building. Soil health has become a policy priority for the first time since the Dust Bowl. Researchers who study soil biology are finally receiving funding to quantify what Depression-era gardeners knew through observation. Living soil outperforms dead soil by every measure that matters. The research confirms what the old-timers always said. Studies on compost application show yield increases of 20 to 50% compared to chemical fertilizer alone. Studies on cover cropping show soil organic matter increases 1 percentage point per decade, translating to significantly improved water retention and nutrient cycling. Studies on no-till farming show reduced erosion, increased carbon storage, and improved profitability once the transition period ends. The mechanisms are now understood scientifically. When you add compost, you are inoculating soil with beneficial microorganisms. Those organisms form relationships with plant roots that chemistry cannot replicate. Mycorrhizal fungi, for example, extend root systems by factors of 10 to 100, accessing phosphorus that roots alone cannot reach. Chemical phosphorus fertilizer actually suppresses mycorrhizal colonization. The more phosphorus you add artificially, the less the fungi help, and the more phosphorus you need to add. A dependency spiral is built into the chemistry. When you maintain soil cover, you are protecting the habitat that soil organisms require. Bare soil heats up, dries out, and kills the microbes that make nutrients available. Covered soil stays cool, retains moisture, and supports thriving biological communities. The difference is visible. Healthy soil looks like chocolate cake, dark, crumbly, and smelling of earth. Depleted soil looks like dust, pale, compacted, and lifeless. When you save seed from your own garden, you are selecting for local adaptation. Commercial seed is bred for average conditions across broad regions. Your saved seed is bred for your exact conditions. 10 years of selection in your specific microclimate produces varieties that outperform commercial alternatives in your specific location. This is not theory. It is documented. The research catches up to the practice. Everything Depression-era gardeners knew through observation, modern science confirms through measurement. The old ways work. They work better than the chemical ways across nearly every metric, except one: convenience for industry. The question is whether we will remember in time. Climate change is stressing agricultural systems worldwide. Droughts are intensifying. Heat waves are breaking records. Rainfall patterns are shifting in ways that existing infrastructure cannot accommodate. The stable conditions that industrial agriculture assumed are no longer stable. In this context, the resilience strategies of Depression-era farmers take on new urgency. Their methods were designed for chaos, for years when the rain does not come, for years when the heat does not break, for years when the economy collapses and you cannot buy inputs at any price. They learned to build fertility that does not require purchase, to store harvests that do not require electricity, to maintain seeds that do not require corporate permission. This knowledge is not nostalgic, it is practical. A family that knows how to compost, how to save seed, how to build a root cellar, how to grow for storage, has options that other families do not. When supply chains break, they eat from their gardens. When prices spike, they draw from their stored food. When commercial varieties fail, they plant their own saved seed. They have resilience built into their household economy. The same principles apply at larger scales. Farms that build soil organic matter recover faster from drought than farms that depend on irrigation. Farms that maintain diverse rotations suffer fewer pest outbreaks than farms locked into monoculture. Farms that cycle nutrients biologically spend less money on inputs than farms that purchase all fertility. The economics of resilience favor the old methods, not the new ones. So let us be specific about what can be recovered. Composting requires nothing but space and patience. Layer kitchen scraps with dried leaves. Keep it moist. Turn it occasionally. In 2 to 6 months, you have free fertility that the chemical industry charges billions to replace. Apply it 1 to 2 inches thick each spring. Within 3 years, your soil transforms. Root cellaring requires only access to the Earth's stable temperature. A hillside dugout, a buried barrel, even an insulated corner of an unheated garage can work. Potatoes last 6 months. Carrots in sand last 4 months. Cabbages wrapped in newspaper survive until March. The key is choosing storage varieties, heirloom types bred before refrigeration, genetics that encode survival instead of supermarket appearance. Seed saving begins with easy crops, tomatoes, peppers, beans, peas. Let fruits ripen fully, collect the seeds, dry them, store them cool. Plant them next spring. Each generation adapts more perfectly to your specific soil, your specific climate, your specific conditions. Trade with neighbors. Join local exchanges. The network strengthens everyone involved. Soil building extends beyond compost to cover crops and rotation. Winter rye and crimson clover planted in fall prevent erosion and add fertility by spring. Mulch between plants retains moisture and slowly decomposes into humus. Rotation prevents depletion and breaks pest cycles. These are not complex techniques. They are patterns that sustained agriculture for 10,000 years before the chemical revolution convinced us to forget them. Each practice reinforces the others. Compost feeds soil biology. Healthy soil grows healthy plants. Healthy plants produce viable seed. Saved seed adapts to local conditions. The system closes into a loop that requires no external input, no purchase, no permission, no dependence. The fertilizer industry is worth over $200 billion globally. That wealth depends on farmers and gardeners believing they need to purchase fertility. Every family that learns to compost represents lost revenue. Every garden that builds soil organically represents a customer who stopped buying. Every seed saved is a seed not sold. This is not conspiracy. It is arithmetic. Industries protect their markets. When free alternatives threaten paid products, industries invest in messaging that favors the paid option. They fund research that emphasizes the benefits of their products. They sponsor educational materials that normalize purchasing. They shape the conversation so thoroughly that most people cannot imagine an alternative. But the alternatives exist. They always existed. Depression-era families did not have access to $200 billion of marketing. They had access to observation, experience, and necessity. They learned that soil could feed itself if you fed it first. They learned that harvest could last all winter if you stored it properly. They learned that seed could perpetuate itself if you saved it carefully. This knowledge was not secret. It was deliberately forgotten. And now it can be deliberately remembered. You can grow what they silenced. Not a plant this time, but a practice. An entire system of practices that makes gardeners independent of industries that profit from their dependence. Start small. Build a compost pile this spring. Save tomato seeds this summer. Build a simple root cellar this fall. Each step teaches the next. Each season deepens your skill. Within 3 years, you will have soil that needs no purchased fertility, seeds that need no catalog order, and harvest that needs no continuous refrigeration. The Depression-era families who survived did not have special knowledge. They had remembered knowledge. Knowledge that had sustained humanity for 10,000 years before the chemical revolution. Knowledge that the fertilizer industry spent 90 years teaching you to forget. But forgetting is not permanent. The knowledge lives in books, in seed banks, in the memories of elders, in the soil itself waiting to be fed again. Every gardener who learns this knowledge becomes a node in a network. Every seed saved is a seed that escapes the market. Every compost pile is a middle finger to the fertilizer industry. In 1933, 20 million American families proved that food security does not require corporate permission. They proved that abundance can be built, not bought. They proved that the ground beneath our feet holds more fertility than all the factories in the world, if we remember how to unlock it. The factories wanted you to forget. The factories needed you to forget. But you are listening now, and the listening is the first step toward remembering. Plant soil that feeds itself. Store harvest that lasts through winter. Save seeds that return every spring without purchase. Join a network of gardeners sharing knowledge that industries cannot control. Become harder to sell to. Become harder to starve. The Depression-era families left us a blueprint, not in books, though books exist. In practice, in the soil of community gardens, in the seed collections of stubborn preservers, in the root cellars that never stopped working. The knowledge survives because some people never stopped using it. Now you know what they know, what your great-grandparents knew, what 20 million American families discovered when the economy collapsed, and the only option was to remember. In the 1960s, agricultural trials in Britain documented something that should have been biologically impossible. 100 tons of green matter per acre, year after year, on soil so depleted that other crops failed completely. The same plot was harvested 5 times in a single season, regrowing to full size in just 4 weeks. No synthetic fertilizer, no irrigation, no replanting for 20 years. The researchers published their findings. The method was proven beyond dispute, and then it vanished from every agricultural curriculum in the Western world. Today, the global fertilizer industry generates over $200 billion annually. They spend millions convincing you that soil is dead without their products, that growth requires their inputs, that abundance depends on their supply chain. But beneath the surface of every garden, a different truth is waiting, one they spent a century trying to bury. This is the story of deep organic mulching, the method that nature perfected, and industry erased. Welcome to Silenced Seeds. Before we break this silence, if these stories matter to you, the best way to preserve this wisdom is simple. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share these seeds with those who need to remember what we forgot. The record opens in Connecticut, 1930. A woman named Ruth Stout stands in her garden. Exhausted. She has spent years doing what every gardener is taught, tilling the soil each spring, pulling weeds through the summer, watering constantly through drought, and buying fertilizer every season. The work never ends. Her back aches. Her hands are raw. She watches her neighbors suffer the same ritual, season after season, convinced this is simply what gardening demands. Then one spring, the man who normally plowed her garden fails to arrive. Ruth waits. Days pass, then weeks. The planting season slips away. In frustration, she walks to a pile of old hay that has been sitting in her yard all winter, grabs an armful, and throws it directly onto her unplowed soil. She pushes aside the hay, drops her seeds into the ground beneath, and covers them back up. What happened next changed everything she understood about growing food. The seeds germinated faster than any she had planted before. The soil beneath the hay stayed moist for days without watering. Weeds that normally invaded every inch of bare ground simply did not appear. When she dug beneath the mulch weeks later, the earth was dark, soft, and crawling with earthworms. Ruth Stout had accidentally rediscovered what nature had been demonstrating for 300 million years on every forest floor on the planet. Organic matter falls, decomposes, and feeds the soil. No tractor required, no bag of fertilizer needed. She never plowed again. For the next 50 years, she grew abundant food by doing almost nothing. She piled spoiled hay 6 to 8 inches thick across her entire garden. When the layer compacted, she added more. She stopped weeding, because weeds could not penetrate the mulch. She stopped watering, because moisture stayed trapped beneath the organic blanket. She stopped buying fertilizer, because the decomposing hay fed her soil better than anything from a factory. Ruth documented everything. She wrote books. She gave lectures across the country. She showed anyone who would listen that the back-breaking labor of conventional gardening was entirely unnecessary. And for a brief moment, people paid attention. In 1961, she published Gardening Without Work. The title alone was a provocation to the agricultural establishment. Extension services dismissed her as eccentric. Garden magazines ignored her findings. But the gardens she grew told a different story. 50 to 60 bushels of potatoes per 1,000 square feet, year after year. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, beans, all thriving in soil that improved every single season. No inputs purchased, no machines required. Just hay, patience, and trust in a process older than agriculture itself. Decades later, the science caught up with what Ruth had proven in her backyard. A comprehensive meta-analysis examining 74 studies with over 1,300 yield observations confirmed her results. Mulching increases crop yields by up to 60%. Another recent analysis focused specifically on organic mulches found median yield increases of 22% and mean increases of 46%, with some crops more than doubling their output under deep mulch. The mechanisms are not mysterious. They are measurable and repeatable. Mulched soil retains moisture that bare ground loses to evaporation within hours. Studies show irrigation needs drop from 14 to 70% depending on climate and crop. Temperature swings that stress plants in conventional gardens virtually disappear under a blanket of organic matter. Research demonstrates that organic mulch can lower soil temperatures by more than 10 degrees Celsius during heat waves, while keeping soil warmer through cold snaps and early frosts. But the most profound transformation happens beneath the surface, where science is only beginning to understand. Deep mulching triggers an explosion in soil biology that no synthetic fertilizer can replicate. Beneficial fungi multiply dramatically, forming networks that transport nutrients directly to plant roots across distances that seem impossible. Earthworm populations increase by factors of 10 or more, aerating compacted ground and depositing nutrient-rich castings throughout the root zone. A meta-analysis of 56 studies confirmed that organic practices significantly enhance soil microbial abundance and activity. The mulch does not just feed plants, it builds an entire living ecosystem. So where is this method now? Why is it not taught in every agricultural program, promoted by every extension service, recommended by every gardening magazine in the country? The answer is worth $230 billion. The global synthetic fertilizer market depends on one fundamental assumption: that soil cannot produce abundant food without purchased inputs. Every bag of nitrogen, every jug of phosphorus, every application of potassium represents recurring revenue. The business model requires dependency. It requires farmers and gardeners to return every season, credit card in hand, convinced they cannot grow food without help from a corporation. Deep mulching threatens the entire model. You pile organic material on your garden once. The decomposition releases nutrients slowly, steadily, for months. Earthworms and fungi do the work that fertilizer factories claim to do. And unlike a bag of synthetic nitrogen, the process improves over time. Year 2 is better than year 1. Year 10 is better than year 5. The soil builds wealth instead of depleting it. You cannot patent deep mulching. You cannot sell proprietary hay. You cannot create dependency when the method eliminates the need for inputs entirely. And so the industry responded the only way it knew how. It made you afraid. For decades, agricultural publications repeated a myth called nitrogen robbery. The theory claimed that wood chips and other carbon-rich materials would steal nitrogen from the soil as they decomposed, starving your plants of essential nutrients. The warning spread through extension bulletins, gardening books, and magazine articles until it became accepted wisdom. Do not mulch with wood chips. Do not use uncomposted material near your vegetables. The advice sounded scientific. It was repeated by experts and professors, and it was almost entirely wrong. When researchers actually tested the claim, they found that nitrogen robbery only occurs when carbon-rich materials are tilled into the soil. Surface mulch, the exact method Ruth Stout pioneered, does not steal nitrogen from plant roots. The thin decomposition zone where mulch meets soil may temporarily immobilize some nitrogen, but this zone actually suppresses weed germination. Meanwhile, established plant roots below remain completely unaffected. University studies demonstrated that surface mulch increases soil nitrogen over time as it slowly breaks down. The myth was not corrected because it was convenient. Every gardener scared away from free wood chips represented a customer for bagged fertilizer. Every person convinced that mulching was dangerous became dependent on the system that created the fear. Homeowner associations began citing residents for yards that looked too natural. Municipalities passed ordinances against deep organic matter in residential gardens. The USDA restricted the use of non-certified hay on federal lands. A method that nature uses on every forest floor on Earth was regulated, mocked, and marginalized until most people had never heard of it. But the knowledge never died. In Connecticut, Ruth Stout's gardens kept producing until she was past 90 years old. In Washington state, a man named Paul Gauchi developed his own version using free arborist wood chips, calling it the Back to Eden method. His documentary has been viewed millions of times online. His garden has become a pilgrimage site for people who cannot believe what they are seeing. Trees growing where the climate says they should not. Soil that started as hard clay, transformed into dark, rich earth, teeming with life. Abundance without the labor that gardening supposedly requires. Today, the method survives in permaculture communities, in backyard experiments, in the hands of gardeners who decided to trust what they could see over what they were told. Every load of wood chips dumped by an arborist represents free fertility. Every bale of spoiled hay a farmer cannot sell becomes someone else's soil builder. The $200 billion industry does not want you to know that the richest gardens grow themselves. That fertility comes from decay, not factories. That the forest floor solved this problem before humans existed. But now you know. You can grow what they silenced. Start with 6 to 8 inches of hay, straw, or wood chips spread directly on your soil. Do not till it in. Do not dig it under. Let it sit and do what organic matter has done for millions of years. Add more as it compacts. Plant through it. Watch the earthworms arrive. Feel the moisture that stays for days instead of hours. And understand that every garden built this way is a quiet rebellion against a system that profits from your dependence. The forest has been teaching this lesson since before humans walked the earth. Maybe it is time we finally listened. There is a tree that holds 4,000 years of sweetness in its branches. Its golden pods contain 3 times as much calcium as milk. Its sugar feeds your gut bacteria instead of spiking your blood. And for millennia, it was the only sweetener desert civilizations ever needed. Then ranchers called it a weed. They burned it. They poisoned it. They cleared millions of acres to make room for cattle that would destroy the very land the tree had protected. In 1948, after decades of trying to kill it, the United States Department of Agriculture admitted defeat. They could not eradicate it. The roots went too deep. This is the story of the tree that sweetened life before sugar existed, and the sugar industry that tried to erase it from memory. Welcome to Silenced Seeds. The record opens in the Sonoran Desert near what is now Tucson, Arizona. Clay jars buried 4,000 years ago were found when archaeologists opened them in 1998. They found mesquite seeds perfectly preserved, still viable after 4 millennia. The people who stored them had no written language, but they understood something we have forgotten. In a land where corn withered and rivers turned to dust, this tree still gave fruit. It was a fortress of survival. The velvet mesquite, Prosopis velutina, evolved for one purpose: to thrive where nothing else could. Its roots reach over 100 feet into the earth, deeper than any well, deeper than drought can follow. Scientists discovered those roots can store up to 600 gallons of water, enough to survive a decade without rain. And the fruit it produces is a miracle of desert engineering. Each pod contains 35% natural sugar, complete protein, and soluble fiber that feeds beneficial gut bacteria. When ground into flour, it lasts for months without spoiling. When the desert air carried the scent of flowering mesquite, it smelled of caramel and smoke. The Tohono O'odham called it our sugar. The Pima knew its value. The Seri depended on it. For thousands of years, families gathered the pods as they fell like golden rain, crushing them into soft flour that fed entire villages through the harshest seasons. When Spanish explorer Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca arrived in 1535, he wrote of pods that tasted of honey itself. He watched families grind them into meal, baking cakes that sustained them through winter. They called it the Tree of Life. By 1541, another explorer documented forests stretching across the Rio Grande. canopies so dense they created their own shade ecosystems. Entire villages lived beneath their branches. The tree gave without asking anything in return. Now here is what makes this tree dangerous to the modern food system. In 1993, researchers at the University of Arizona analyzed mesquite pods and found something remarkable. The sweetness comes from fructosaccharides, plant sugars that feed beneficial gut bacteria instead of raising blood sugar. Mesquite has a low glycemic index, and it is safe for people managing diabetes. A teaspoon of mesquite flour sweetens coffee without a single energy crash. One researcher wrote, "It is the sugar that heals instead of harms." The pods contain 3 times more calcium than milk, and protein comparable to eggs. The fiber content promotes gut health in ways the Tohono O'odham understood intuitively 3,000 years ago. And unlike processed sugars that spike insulin and feed inflammation, mesquite flour delivers sustained energy, all from a tree that never needed irrigation, fertilizer, or human intervention. By 2005, health stores across the United States started selling mesquite sweetener. Prices jumped to $20 a pound. Chefs in Tucson and Santa Fe began baking mesquite bread and even making mesquite ice cream. The same fruit once burned by empire now sat on supermarket shelves beside maple syrup and honey. So what happened? How did a tree this valuable become classified as a pest? By the late 1800s, the land changed hands. Ranchers moved in with cattle, cotton, and conquest. To them, mesquite was not the tree of life. It was just a weed. Something in the way of profit. The colonial system brought sugarcane from distant islands. They built mills, plantations, systems of control. Mesquite, which grew freely without irrigation or ownership, had no place in that economy. You cannot patent a wild tree. You cannot sell fertilizer for a plant that makes its own. You cannot control a food source that belongs to no one and everyone. Millions of acres were cleared, trees cut to the ground. But mesquite does not surrender easily. Even when the trunk was severed, the roots remained silent, patient, waiting underground. They burned it to plant cotton. They poisoned it for wheat. But the roots went deeper than anyone guessed. Cut to the ground, mesquite returned. 10 new shoots for every trunk removed. The irony is tragic. Those European crops failed during long droughts, while the mesquite could have kept them alive. But a tree that feeds people for free represents lost profit for every industry built on scarcity. By the early 1900s, ranchers believed they had won. Millions of cattle roamed where mesquite once stood. They had turned wilderness into wealth, or so they thought. Within 20 years, the soil cracked like pottery. Rivers dried. The ground, stripped of its cover, blew away in the wind. Cattle began to starve, and the tree they had cleared, the tree they called a pest, started creeping back. Ranchers called it the invader, but it had been there for thousands of years before any fence or railroad. The United States Department of Agriculture launched decades of eradication campaigns. They poisoned it. They burned it. They declared war on a tree that was quietly healing the land beneath it. Then, in 1948, the USDA admitted defeat. They published what amounts to a surrender. Mesquite cannot be eradicated. The roots go too deep. The seeds remain viable in soil for over 40 years. A 1960 study in the Journal of Range Management found 60% germination after 4 decades underground. You cannot kill what refuses to die. But the suppression continued in subtler ways. Agricultural extension offices still teach ranchers to view mesquite as the enemy. Herbicide companies still sell chemicals specifically engineered to kill it. The sugar industry, worth $200 billion globally, has no interest in promoting a sweetener that grows wild and free. But it survived. It always survives. By the 1970s, ecologists gave mesquite a new name: keystone species. It became the silent engineer of the desert ecosystem. Its deep roots pull nitrogen from the air, a feat few plants can manage, and they feed it back into dead ground. Beneath its shade, grass began to grow again, wildlife returned, and the desert started breathing. What the world had called a weed had been quietly healing the land the entire time. Around 2012, a quiet movement began in the deserts of Sonora and Arizona. Indigenous farmers, elders, and food historians wanted to bring mesquite back from memory to life. They called it reclaiming the forgotten tree. Many still had old seeds passed down in jars, hidden for safety through generations. A Tohono O'odham farmer named Maria Lopez started planting them again in 2013 using her grandmother's methods. Within 2 years, her trees were covered in pods. She said the smell reminded her of childhood mornings when families roasted the pods for breakfast. By 2020, the conversation shifted. Global droughts were breaking records. In parts of California, farmland cracked. Wheat yields dropped by 40%. Scientists started asking one simple question: what survives when everything else fails? The answer pointed back to mesquite. NASA researchers studying sustainable crops noted how its roots can reach 200 feet underground, tapping water no other plant can touch. In 2021, Mexico's National Forestry Commission launched programs to replant mesquite across 300,000 hectares of degraded land. The Food and Agriculture Organization called it a forgotten crop of survival. The tree that ranchers tried to eradicate for a century is now being planted to save the future. You can grow what they silenced. Mesquite thrives in poor soil, survives drought, and asks for nothing. Harvest the pods in summer, grind them into flour, taste sweetness that has no crash, no spike, no corporate patent. Every tree planted is a vote against a food system built on scarcity. Every pod ground into flour is proof that the answers to tomorrow's hunger may already be growing in the soil beneath our feet. Every year, American gardeners spend over $50 billion on fertilizers that stop working the moment they stop buying. Bags of nitrogen that vanish in rain. Phosphorus that locks itself into soil and never reaches a root. Meanwhile, 7 soil amendments used by ancient civilizations for thousands of years can permanently transform dead soil into living, productive earth for less than $100. The synthetic fertilizer industry generates $230 billion annually by making sure you never learn their names. The record opens in the Amazon basin, around 450 AD. Researchers excavating ancient settlement sites found soil so black, so impossibly rich, that it held its fertility 1,500 years after the civilization that created it had vanished. They called it Terra Preta. Carbon dating confirmed it was deliberately built. The knowledge of how was never written down, but the soil itself was the document. So what happened to that knowledge? In 1909, a German chemist named Fritz Haber synthesized ammonia from atmospheric nitrogen and created artificial fertilizer. Within a generation, ancient soil wisdom was buried under bags of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. A $230 billion industry was born, built on a single myth that your soil needs what only they can manufacture and sell. 3 nutrients out of 17. The pantry is full, but the door is locked. A 2025 meta-analysis tracking over 40 controlled studies confirmed the right combination of amendments can boost yields by 39% and soil organic carbon by 62% in a single season. The knowledge was never lost. It was simply made inconvenient to find. Until now. Here are the 7 amendments they never told you about. Amendment 1. Biochar. The ancient carbon secret. Somewhere in the Amazon, a civilization deliberately built the most fertile soil on Earth and then left. What they left behind was not stone or gold. It was carbon. Modern archaeologists studying terra preta sites found that the ancient black earth contained deliberately placed biochar, the charred residue of organic material burned under low oxygen conditions through a process scientists now call pyrolysis. The resulting carbon structure is architecturally extraordinary. 1 gram of biochar contains a surface area equivalent to 2 tennis courts. That internal architecture does something no synthetic fertilizer can replicate. It houses life. A 2025 MDPI review confirmed that biochar amended soils show reduced nitrogen requirements, improved nutrient bioavailability, and enhanced microbial activity across multiple soil types. A meta-analysis found biochar amended compost boosted plant productivity and soil quality by an average of 44%. A 2021 Frontiers review of large-scale field trials demonstrated biochar reducing soil bulk density by 3 to 31%, while improving fertility markers consistently across climates and soil types. The mechanism is threefold. Biochar provides habitat for beneficial microbes that break down organic matter and make nutrients available to plant roots. It holds water and dissolved nutrients in its porous channels, releasing them slowly rather than losing them to runoff. And it creates air pockets throughout the soil matrix that prevent compaction and allow roots to breathe. Apply biochar once at 10% by volume into your top 6 inches of soil. You will not apply it again. The terra preta sites in the Amazon are still producing today, 2,000 years after the last human hand touched them. Amendment 2. Worm castings. Biology measured in billions. The fertilizer bag in your garage tells you 3 numbers. It does not tell you what is absent. Worm castings contain 5 times more nitrogen than ordinary garden soil, 7 times more phosphorus, and 11 times more potassium. But none of those figures explain why worm castings outperform fertilizers with far higher NPK ratings. The explanation is not chemistry. It is life. A 2025 Science Direct systematic review confirmed that vermicompost enhances nitrogen fixation and crop yields across multiple food categories. A 2023 MDPI study documented worm castings improving nutrient availability while increasing plant tolerance to pests and disease. Research from LSU Ag Center documented specific micronutrient profiles in castings that support plant immune function in ways no synthetic product replicates. Each gram of high-quality worm castings contains billions of beneficial microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, and protozoa that form symbiotic relationships with plant roots and improve nutrient uptake by up to 40%. They also produce humic acid, which improves soil structure and helps plants absorb minerals more efficiently. Worm castings are pH neutral. They cannot burn plants regardless of application rate. And unlike synthetic fertilizers that spike and crash, the microbial populations they deliver remain active through an entire growing season. Mix 25% castings into new beds. Top-dress established beds with a half-inch layer each fall. Or build your own worm bin for $50 and produce castings indefinitely from kitchen scraps. The ancient Amazonian farmers composted their organic waste directly into the soil. They were building biology, not feeding numbers. Amendment 3. Gypsum, the clay unlocking mineral. If your soil is heavy clay, you already know the punishment. Rock hard in summer, suffocating wet clay in winter. and roots that spend their entire season fighting soil structure rather than growing food. Synthetic fertilizers applied to clay soil face the same problem your roots do. The nutrients cannot penetrate. The pantry is full, but the door is locked. Gypsum, calcium sulfate, works at the particle level. Calcium ions bind to the flat, tiny clay particles and force them to aggregate into larger clumps through a process called flocculation. Those aggregates create pore space where air can flow, water can drain, and roots can push through without resistance. Ohio State University Extension documented gypsum improving soil sulfur, calcium, and crop yields in low sulfur fields. Cornell University confirmed structural and nutrient supply benefits. Michigan State University Extension documented gypsum reducing aluminum toxicity in soils with low pH while improving water infiltration in sodic conditions. A Purdue University analysis confirmed gypsum's effectiveness for specific clay profiles where other amendments fall short. The critical distinction from lime is pH neutrality. Lime makes soil more alkaline. If your soil is already neutral or slightly alkaline, lime creates new problems while fixing none. Gypsum delivers calcium and structural improvement without touching pH at all. Apply 40 pounds per 1,000 square feet, worked into the top 6 inches. Within a few weeks of rainfall or irrigation, you will notice the difference in how the soil feels under your hands. Amendment 4. Green sand, the ocean mineral library. 100 million years ago, ancient shallow seas deposited a mineral-dense sediment called glauconite across what is now the American Midwest and Eastern seaboard. That same mineral, mined today as green sand, contains iron, potassium, magnesium, and over 30 trace minerals that plants require for functions far beyond what NPK can support. The problem with modern fertilizers is not what they contain. It is what they omit. Iron is required for chlorophyll production. Magnesium is the atom at the center of every chlorophyll molecule. Manganese activates the enzymes that drive photosynthesis. Zinc is essential for the synthesis of growth hormones. Without these, plants show deficiency symptoms even when NPK levels register as perfect. Yellow leaves, stunted growth, hollow fruit, and poor seed set. It is a locked door, no matter how much you pile against it. A 2025 ResearchGate study confirmed that glauconite enhances soil fertility and water-holding capacity across soil types. A 2025 PubMed study documented glauconite compounds improving saline soil properties and significantly boosting crop yields compared to synthetic control plots. Because green sand releases its mineral content slowly over 3 to 5 years, a single application builds long-term soil fertility rather than a seasonal spike that crashes after rain. Green sand works in synergy with the biology amendments. The microorganisms in worm castings and activated compost help break down glauconite particles, making minerals available to roots far faster than green sand applied to biologically dead soil. Apply 50 to 100 pounds per 1,000 square feet once every several years. You are not feeding this season's plants. You are building the soil library that feeds the next decade. Amendment 5. Azomite, the volcanic trace mineral archive. 60 million years ago, a volcano erupted in what is now central Utah. The ash settled into an inland sea. Minerals concentrated. Over millions of years, the deposit transformed into one of the most chemically complete mineral substances in the geological record. We now call it azomite, a name derived from A to Z of minerals, including trace elements. That name is accurate. It contains over 70 naturally occurring elements in forms that soil biology can process and deliver to plant roots. Modern NPK fertilizers address 3 nutrients. Complete plant health requires 17 essential elements, plus a spectrum of trace minerals. When trace elements are absent, the cascade of deficiencies is specific and damaging. Boron deficiency causes hollow stem in broccoli, cracked fruit in tomatoes, and failed seed development across dozens of crops. Molybdenum is essential for nitrogen fixation in legumes. Without it, even soil rich in nitrogen cannot support healthy bean or pea production. Selenium, cobalt, and vanadium, present in traces that soil tests rarely measure, support plant immune responses and enzyme activity that synthetic chemistry has never successfully replicated. Research published in the Journal of Sustainable Forestry documented volcanic ash as a multi-nutrient fertilizer, showing measurable and consistent crop improvements across test sites. A study published through Semantic Scholar confirmed azomite modulating gene expression in plants through phyto-B pathways, a mechanism that affects growth, resilience, and nutrient use efficiency at the cellular level. Apply 5 to 10 pounds per 1,000 square feet once per season, incorporated into the top few inches of soil. Because the particles are extremely fine, mineral release begins almost immediately. For less than a penny per square foot, you deliver the complete mineral spectrum that volcanic soil has provided to the world's most productive agricultural regions for thousands of years without the volcano. Amendment 6. Activated compost. The living soil accelerator. Compost alone is valuable. Compost activated with biochar and inoculated with worm castings becomes something categorically different. The distinction matters because biological systems compound. Biochar in compost provides the physical housing for microbial colonies. Biology from worm castings introduced into that housing creates a self-sustaining microbial ecosystem. Compost itself provides the food supply that keeps that population thriving through the entire growing season. The research confirms what the combination produces. A meta-analysis found that biochar-amended compost boosted plant productivity and overall soil quality by an average of 44%, significantly outperforming either amendment used alone. A 2024 PMC study confirmed that enriched and activated compost amendments improve soil fertility markers and crop yields beyond what standard compost achieves. A 2025 Wiley publication linked organic amendment applications directly to measurable yield increases in multiple field environments across crop types. The deeper principle is the direction of effect. The synthetic fertilizer system is designed to degrade over time. Soil biology dies under continuous synthetic inputs, requiring more inputs to maintain the same output. Each season, the dose must increase. Activated compost works in the opposite direction. Each application improves the biological baseline for the following season. You build a soil that needs less over time, not more. That trajectory is the opposite of dependency. Apply 3 to 4 inches of activated compost across all garden beds in fall. By spring, billions of organisms will have processed that material into living fertility distributed throughout your topsoil layer. Begin building your own by mixing finished compost with a 10% biochar addition and top dressing with worm castings at the start of decomposition. Amendment 7. Rock phosphate. The slow-release mineral reserve. Phosphorus is one of the 3 nutrients the synthetic fertilizer industry sells you. But the phosphorus in those bags is processed, water-soluble, and designed to perform quickly and disappear just as fast, often within weeks of application. Much of it bonds with soil particles and becomes chemically locked before roots can access it. The rest leaches into waterways, contributing to algae blooms and ecological damage downstream. You pay for phosphorus that plants never receive. and then you buy more. Rock phosphate is a naturally occurring mineral deposit formed from ancient marine sediments. It releases phosphorus slowly over several growing seasons in forms that soil biology can process and deliver directly to the root zone. A 2021 meta-analysis confirmed that biochar significantly increases phosphorus availability and uptake, particularly in acidic soils, when combined with natural phosphorus mineral sources rather than synthetic applications. A 2025 PMC meta-analysis confirmed that phosphorus, potassium, and other nutrient concentrations improve significantly with natural mineral amendment combinations compared to synthetic single-application methods. The critical factor is, again, biology. Rock phosphate applied to biologically depleted soil releases slowly because there are no organisms to break down the mineral particles. Applied to soil enriched with worm castings, biochar, and activated compost, the microbial activity accelerates rock phosphate breakdown and delivers its phosphorus to roots within a single growing season. The 7 amendments in this vault are not independent products. They are an interdependent system. Each one makes the others work better. Apply 10 pounds per 100 square feet once every 3 to 5 years. Your soil stores the phosphorus reserve and releases it according to biological demand rather than a calendar schedule. But it survived. The knowledge never disappeared into corporate vaults or regulatory archives. While the synthetic fertilizer industry was consolidating into a $230 billion system, a quiet network of researchers, indigenous farmers, and stubborn gardeners preserved these amendments through generations of institutional neglect. University extension offices at Ohio State, Cornell, Michigan State, Texas A&M, and Mississippi State published field research confirming what ancient farmers knew before the word agriculture existed. Meta-analysis after meta-analysis, published between 2021 and 2026, documented what no bag of nitrogen has ever replicated: that permanent soil health grows from biology, minerals, and structure, not from synthetic chemistry purchased each spring. Terra Preta sites in the Amazon produce extraordinary yields today, 2,000 years after their creators vanished. Green sand deposits applied by New Jersey farmers in the 1800s continued releasing minerals for decades after a single application. Tohono O'odham farmers in Arizona preserved soil knowledge through centuries of displacement and colonization, and used it to restore harvests in conditions where modern commodity crops fail. They did not need a fertilizer company. They needed soil that worked on its own terms. Today, that knowledge is accelerating, not because the industry permitted it, because the research became undeniable, and because home growers, frustrated with expensive products that produced marginal results, started asking why ancient systems produced permanent ones. The silence around these amendments is breaking. You can grow what they silenced. Start with a soil test from your county extension office, usually $15 to $20, to identify your baseline and your specific deficiencies. Then build your amendment stack strategically. If your soil is heavy clay, begin with gypsum and green sand. If your soil is biologically dead and compacted, biochar and worm castings come first. If you are seeing mineral deficiency symptoms despite regular fertilizing, add azomite and rock phosphate. Then tie the entire system together with activated compost applied each fall. The total investment for all 7 amendments applied to a 1,000 square foot garden runs under $120. That is less than most gardeners spend on synthetic fertilizer in a single season, and these amendments do not leave your soil depleted at the end of it. Biochar lasts decades. Rock phosphate feeds roots for years. Worm-casting biology rebuilds itself season after season. The $230 billion fertilizer industry profits from a cycle of dependency they designed. These 7 amendments break that cycle permanently. The knowledge was never lost. It was waiting in the soil, in the research literature, in the hands of farmers who never needed a bag of synthetic nitrogen to grow food. In 90 AD, a Greek physician named Dioscorides documented a plant with sticky roots in a text called Materia Medica. For 1500 years, that text remained Europe's primary medical reference. For all those centuries, this one plant was prescribed for broken bones. The Greeks called it symphyton. Its name meant to make grow together. The Romans proved it worked. Pliny the Elder boiled the roots into a paste and used it to stick pieces of meat together. The adhesive held. For 2,000 years, Europeans called this plant knit bone. Soldiers used it to heal fractures on the battlefield. In 2010, randomized clinical trials proved it reduced pain 95% faster than placebo. Then the Food and Drug Administration banned it. Not because it failed, because it worked too well and it cost nothing. Welcome to Silenced Seeds. Before we break this silence, if these stories matter to you, the best way to preserve this wisdom is simple. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share these seeds with those who need to remember what we forgot. The record opens in ancient Rome, 1st century AD. Pliny the Elder is documenting every medicinal plant in the known world for his Encyclopedia Naturalis Historia. In Book 26, he writes about a plant used for bruises, sprains, and wounds that heal badly. He describes boiling the roots into a paste so powerful it could bind severed flesh. 500 years later, the knowledge spread across Europe. Monastery gardens cultivated it alongside feverfew and chamomile. By the Middle Ages, every village healer knew its name. In Germany, they called it Behenwell. Behen meant bone. Well meant to grow together. In England, they called it bruisewort and blackwort. In every language, the name pointed to the same truth. This plant healed what was broken. Nicholas Culpeper, the 17th century herbalist who wanted medicine available to the poor, wrote about it in The English Physician. He stated that it was so powerful to consolidate and knit together that it could heal inward wounds and bruises, outward wounds and sores, broken bones, inflammation, gout, and pained joints. That was 1656. 350 years later, clinical trials would prove him right. This is comfrey, Symphytum officinale, the plant whose very name means to unite. And the science confirms what healers knew for millennia. In 2010, researchers at the German Sport University in Cologne conducted a double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial on 120 patients with acute back pain. Half received a cream containing comfrey root extract. Half received placebo. The results were published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. Pain intensity on active movement decreased 95% in the comfrey group. In the placebo group, it decreased 38%. The comfrey cream worked 2.5 times better than doing nothing. Within 1 hour of application, pain had already dropped 33%. The effect was almost immediate. In 2007, another randomized trial tested comfrey on 220 patients with painful osteoarthritis of the knee. The comfrey group showed 55% reduction in pain and stiffness. The placebo group showed 11%. Comfrey worked 5 times better than placebo for degenerative joint disease. And it was not just equal to pharmaceutical drugs. A clinical trial comparing comfrey root extract to diclofenac gel, one of the most commonly prescribed topical anti-inflammatory drugs, found that comfrey outperformed the pharmaceutical. Pain on pressure dropped 81% with comfrey versus 75% with diclofenac. Ankle swelling decreased 80% versus 69%. Both patients and physicians rated comfrey significantly more effective. The active compounds include allantoin, which stimulates cell proliferation and accelerates wound healing, and rosmarinic acid, a powerful anti-inflammatory that inhibits the same enzymes as ibuprofen. The German Commission E officially approved comfrey root for treating bruises, sprains, and muscle pain. So what happened? Why is a plant with 2,000 years of documented use and multiple randomized clinical trials not in every medicine cabinet in America? On July 6, 2001, the FDA issued an advisory recommending that manufacturers remove comfrey products from the market. The reason was pyrrolizidine alkaloids, compounds found in the roots that can cause liver damage when ingested in large quantities over long periods. The FDA cited cases of hepatic veno-occlusive disease in people who had consumed comfrey internally as pills, teas, or dietary supplements. The ban was sound for internal use. Eating comfrey roots over months or years can damage the liver. No one disputes that, but the headlines did not make the distinction. They said comfrey causes liver damage. Full stop. Garden centers saw the word toxic and stopped stocking it. Nurseries refused to carry it. The public heard liver damage and assumed the plant was dangerous to touch. No one explained that the clinical trials proving comfrey's effectiveness used topical preparations applied to the skin. No one explained that modern comfrey creams are manufactured from alkaloid-free cultivars, specifically bred to eliminate the toxic compounds. The result was surgical. A plant that had been healing injuries for 2,000 years vanished from American pharmacies within 5 years. The same plant that outperformed diclofenac in clinical trials was suddenly too dangerous to sell. Meanwhile, the pharmaceutical pain industry continued its expansion. The global market for topical pain relief products exceeds $40 billion annually. Diclofenac gel, the drug comfrey outperformed, generates billions in annual sales. And the opioid crisis was just beginning. In 2001, the same year the FDA banned comfrey supplements, opioid prescriptions in America were climbing toward their peak. Doctors were writing hundreds of millions of prescriptions for drugs that would kill tens of thousands of people annually. The pharmaceutical industry was about to unleash the deadliest drug epidemic in American history. And a plant that could reduce pain 95%, that had 0 recorded deaths from topical use, that grew freely in backyard gardens, was declared too dangerous to sell. The timing is worth noting. You cannot patent comfrey. You cannot genetically modify it to require annual repurchase. You cannot sell expensive prescription pads alongside it. A $40 billion industry does not tolerate competition from something that costs nothing after you plant it once. But comfrey did not disappear. It survived in the gardens of herbalists who understood the difference between eating a root and applying a salve. It survived in European pharmacies where alkaloid-free preparations remained on shelves. It survived in clinical research that continued to document what ancient healers had always known. In 2005, the American Herbal Products Association and the FDA clarified that pyrrolizidine alkaloid-free comfrey preparations were not subject to the 2001 advisory. External use of properly prepared comfrey was never the problem. But by then, the damage was done. The public had learned to fear what their grandparents had trusted. In Germany, comfrey root extract creams are still licensed for treating muscle and joint pain. They have been tested in children as young as 3 years old with no adverse effects. Modern preparations contain less than 0.35 parts per million of pyrrolizidine alkaloids, a concentration so low it cannot be measured by standard tests. And the science keeps confirming the ancient wisdom. A 2013 review traced comfrey's medicinal use from Dioscorides through culpepper to modern clinical trials. The author concluded that multiple randomized controlled trials substantiate the efficacy of topical comfrey preparations for pain, inflammation, and swelling of muscles and joints. What the Greeks called symphyton still works. What medieval healers called knit bone still heals. The plant that Pliny the Elder used to bind flesh together still reduces pain faster than placebo and better than some pharmaceuticals. You can grow what they silenced. Comfrey thrives in most temperate climates. Plant root cuttings in spring or fall, in partial shade with moist soil. Within 2 years, you will have established plants that return every spring for decades. Harvest leaves to make poultices for bruises and sprains. The knowledge never died. It retreated to the margins while synthetic drugs took center stage. It waited while the opioid epidemic proved that pharmaceutical solutions carry risks far greater than any herb. Comfrey does not ask for a prescription. It does not require a pharmacy. It does not generate shareholder returns. And that is precisely why you were taught to fear it. The Greeks named it for what it does: to make grow together. The bones, the tissues, the wounds, and maybe, eventually, the knowledge we tried to separate from the plants that carry it. The Romans fed an empire of 60 million people without a single bag of synthetic fertilizer. For 800 years, their farms produced harvests that modern agronomists still struggle to explain. They grew wheat on the same fields for centuries without depleting the soil. They turned rocky hillsides into productive farmland. They irrigated deserts and transformed swamps into grain belts that fed armies marching across 3 continents. In 1913, German chemists invented synthetic nitrogen. Within 50 years, everything the Romans knew was declared obsolete. Universities stopped teaching it. Extension services forgot it existed. And a $230 billion industry rose up to sell farmers something the Romans produced for free. If this system built the greatest empire in human history, why are we not using it? The answer reveals everything wrong with how we grow food today. Welcome to Silenced Seeds. Before we break this silence, if these stories matter to you, the best way to preserve this wisdom is simple. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share these seeds with those who need to remember what we forgot. The record opens in the Italian countryside around 50 AD. A Roman landowner named Lucius Junius Moderatus Columella sits in his villa, composing what will become the most influential agricultural text in Western history. Die Re Rustica, On the Art of Farming. 12 volumes detailing every technique Roman farmers had perfected over 5 centuries. Columella was not guessing. He was documenting a system that had already proven itself across an empire stretching from Britain to Syria. And at its heart was a principle modern agriculture has spent a century trying to forget. The soil is alive. Feed it, and it feeds you forever. Starve it, and no amount of chemistry can save you. The Romans understood something we pretend not to know. Fertility is not a substance you buy in a bag. It is a relationship between plants, animals, water, and earth. Break that relationship, and the land dies. Maintain it, and the land gives without end. Roman farmers operated on a system Columella called food, feed, fallow. In year 1, they planted grain for human consumption. In year 2, they planted legumes, beans, and lupines that pulled nitrogen from the air and fixed it into the soil. In year 3, they let the field rest, grazing animals whose manure returned nutrients to the earth. Then the cycle began again. Modern research from Oregon State University confirms what Roman farmers knew 2,000 years ago. This rotation increased yields by 10 to 25% compared to continuous cropping. But the real benefit was invisible. The soil grew richer each year instead of poorer. Roman fields that had been farmed for 3 centuries still produced abundant harvests. Modern fields farmed for 3 decades often require double the fertilizer just to maintain yields. The second pillar was manure. It was not scattered carelessly. Instead, it was managed with the precision of an engineering project. Columella ranked manures by potency, with poultry droppings at the top, then goat, sheep, cattle, and pig in descending order. Horse manure was considered too hot and had to be aged. Human waste, collected from the cities and transported to farms, was valued so highly that Roman law regulated its sale. The manure was not applied fresh. It was composted in covered pits, sometimes for a full year, until weed seeds were destroyed and nutrients stabilized. A study published in 2019 in the MDPY journal traced phosphorus signatures in ancient Roman soils and found evidence of systematic manuring practices stretching back millennia. The Romans were building soil fertility the way they built roads, for permanence. The third pillar was water. Roman aqueducts are famous for supplying cities, but their agricultural branches are largely forgotten. Channels diverted from main aqueducts fed reservoirs that irrigated farms throughout the dry Mediterranean summer. The Aqua Claudia alone delivered nearly 200,000 cubic meters of water each day. Branches of that system turned marginal land into some of the most productive farms in the empire. The fourth pillar was terracing. Roman engineers classified land into 3 categories: champaign, the flat plains; hilly, the moderate slopes; mountainous, the steep terrain most farmers would abandon. But the Romans did not abandon difficult land. They transformed it. Stone walls followed the contours of hillsides, creating level planting beds that captured rainfall and prevented erosion. A 2018 study in the MDPY journal Water found that Roman-era terraces in the eastern Mediterranean are still functional after 2,000 years. These 4 pillars worked together as a system. Rotation restored nitrogen, manure returned organic matter, irrigation prevented drought stress, terracing stopped erosion. No single element could sustain productivity alone. Together they created an agricultural engine that powered civilization for 8 centuries. So what happened? Why did we abandon a system that built empires? The answer is not complicated. It is economic. In 1909, German chemist Fritz Haber demonstrated that nitrogen could be synthesized from air using high pressure and a catalyst. By 1913, Karl Bosch had industrialized the process. Factories could now produce what Roman farmers grew in their fields: synthetic ammonia, artificial fertility. The timing is critical. World War I created massive demand for explosives, which require nitrogen. When the war ended, the factories needed new markets. They found one: agriculture. By the 1920s, chemical companies were marketing synthetic fertilizer to farmers who had practiced rotation for generations. The pitch was simple. Why wait 3 years for legumes to fix nitrogen when you can spread it from a bag in an afternoon? Why compost manure for a year when you can buy ready-made fertility? Why build terraces when you can mine the soil now and deal with consequences later? Within 2 generations, the Roman system was declared primitive. Universities stopped teaching rotation as a fertility strategy and started teaching it as a disease control measure. Manure became waste to be disposed of rather than treasure to be cultivated. Terracing was abandoned in favor of heavy machinery that demanded flat fields. The integrated system that sustained civilization was dismantled piece by piece. Today, the synthetic fertilizer industry generates $230 billion annually. Global agriculture applies more than 190 million metric tons of fertilizer each year. The Haber-Bosch process consumes roughly 1 to 2% of all energy produced on Earth. Modern farms are not farms anymore. They are delivery systems for chemical inputs. And the soil is dying. Topsoil loss now exceeds 2 billion tons annually in the United States alone. Fields that grew abundant crops without synthetic inputs for millennia now require increasing applications just to maintain yields. What the Romans built in centuries, we have destroyed in decades. But the knowledge never disappeared. It was buried, not erased. In 2020, researchers at Bioneers documented farms using Roman-style rotation achieving 25% higher yields than conventional chemical farming. In 2023, a study in the Journal of Plant Nutrition and Soil Science analyzed Roman green manuring practices and concluded they were scientifically optimal for Mediterranean soils. The data keeps confirming what Columella wrote 2,000 years ago. Soil health determines everything. Today, a quiet revolution is spreading. Regenerative farmers are rediscovering rotation. Cover crops are replacing fallow with even more efficient nitrogen fixation. Composted manure is returning to fields that had been sterilized by chemicals. Terracing is being restored on eroded hillsides across 3 continents. The system that built Rome never stopped working. We simply stopped using it. You do not need an empire to practice Roman soil methods. You need understanding. Rotate your crops so nitrogen-fixing plants follow nitrogen-demanding ones. Compost manure and organic waste until it becomes dark, stable humus. Manage water so it soaks into soil rather than running off. Build soil upward instead of mining it downward. The fertilizer industry will tell you this is inefficient. They will tell you modern chemistry has replaced ancient wisdom. They will tell you 60 million people could never be fed without synthetic inputs. But Rome fed 60 million people for 800 years. When Rome fell, it was not because the soil failed. The soil was still producing. The empire collapsed from politics, plague, and invasion. The farms continued. The knowledge persisted in monastery gardens and peasant villages through the Dark Ages, waiting for anyone wise enough to remember. The $230 billion industry that sells you fertility in bags does not want you to know that fertility grows in fields for free. They do not want you to understand that the system they replaced was not primitive. It was superior. It built the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen, and it could do it again. The Romans wrote it all down. The books survived. The techniques still work. The only question is whether we are ready to stop buying what we can grow. What if I told you there is a tuber with more healthy fat than olive oil, more fiber than oats, and complete protein rivaling eggs? It fed pharaohs. It sustained Ice Age hunters. It grows in sand, survives drought, and produces food for decades without replanting. And right now, government agencies spend millions teaching farmers to poison it. They did not classify it as a weed because it fails. They classified it as a weed because it succeeds without permission. A crop that feeds you forever cannot generate recurring revenue, and that made it dangerous. This seed was silenced in the 20th century, but it refused to die. Welcome to silenced seeds. The record opens in Upper Egypt, at a site called Wadi Kubaniya, 16,000 years before the present. Archaeologists sifting through ancient sediment discovered something that rewrote the timeline of human agriculture. Charred tubers, processing stones. Evidence of systematic harvesting 8,000 years before anyone planted wheat. These were not emergency rations. This was organized food production during the last ice age. The tubers belonged to Cyperus esculentus. The world now calls it chufa. Ancient Egyptians called it Hab el-Aziz, the beloved seed. By the time pharaohs ruled the Nile, chufa had become sacred. Tomb excavations at sites dating to 4000 BCE found dried tubers placed alongside gold and lapis lazuli. These were provisions for the afterlife. Forensic analysis of mummified remains confirmed chufa in their digestive systems, the last meal before eternity. Wall paintings in the tomb of Rekmire show the full production cycle. Workers harvesting, grinding stones, crushing tubers into flour, honey being folded into the mixture, conical cakes shaped for offering to Amun, king of the gods. This was not peasant food. This was temple food, divine food. The Greeks documented it. Theophrastus wrote instructions for cultivation in the 4th century BCE. Pliny recorded its spread across the Roman Empire. Arab traders carried it to North Africa and Spain. By the 13th century, farmers in Valencia were producing a cold, sweet drink from ground chufa that they called horchata. 700 years later, they still make it. For 16 millennia, this tuber fed civilizations across 3 continents. Then the silence began. What they found surprised everyone. Modern nutritional analysis revealed why ancient peoples valued chufa so highly. Research published in Frontiers in Nutrition documented the composition. Chufa tubers contain 25% fat, predominantly oleic acid, the same monounsaturated fat that made olive oil famous for heart health. But chufa produces that fat underground, in a tuber that stores indefinitely without refrigeration. The protein content reaches 10%, with a complete amino acid profile. The fiber content exceeds 30%, mostly resistant starch. This fiber feeds beneficial gut bacteria, stabilizes blood sugar, and passes through digestion without spiking insulin. A study published in 2023 in the Journal of Food Science confirmed chufa's low glycemic index, and that makes it suitable for diabetic diets. Mineral density rivals supplements. Calcium, magnesium, potassium, iron, and phosphorus are concentrated in a package the size of a chickpea. Vitamin E appears at levels that support cardiovascular function. Antioxidant compounds that researchers are still cataloging are present too. One tuber contains what modern food manufacturers spend billions trying to engineer into processed products. It grows in sand. So what happened? How did 16,000 years of cultivation end with a USDA bulletin calling this plant a menace? The answer is geometry. The geometry of industrial profit. Chufa spreads through underground rhizomes. One plant produces up to 75 tubers. Each tuber can remain dormant in soil for years, then sprout when conditions improve. You cannot plow it out. You cannot starve it out. Cut the visible plant, and the roots send up new shoots within weeks. For ancient farmers, this was perfection. Plant once, harvest forever. The tubers survived drought, flood, and neglect. They stored nutrients underground where no thief could steal them. They required no annual seed purchase, no fertilizer, no pesticide. They simply produced food, year after year, generation after generation. For industrial agriculture, this was a catastrophe. The modern farm economy runs on dependency. Farmers buy seed each spring. They buy fertilizer to feed it. They buy herbicides to protect it. They buy equipment to harvest it. Every input generates revenue for corporations upstream. A crop that eliminates all inputs eliminates all profit. You cannot patent chufa. It has been in the public domain for 16,000 years. You cannot sell proprietary seed when farmers save tubers and replant them indefinitely. You cannot sell fertilizer to a plant that thrives in poor soil. You cannot sell herbicides to protect a crop that outcompetes weeds naturally. The $40 billion herbicide industry cannot tolerate a food source that costs nothing to grow. So they changed the language. What fed pharaohs became a pest. What sustained Ice Age survivors became an invasive species. What provided complete nutrition for millennia became yellow nutsedge. one of the world's worst weeds. They silenced this seed with paperwork and poison. The campaign was systematic. Agricultural extension offices published eradication guides. Universities received funding to study chemical control. The United States Department of Agriculture released technical bulletins specifically targeting yellow nutsedge in commodity crop regions. The chemical arsenal grew: glyphosate, halosulfuron, sulfentrazone, bentazone, imazapic. Each formulation was designed to kill a plant that had survived 16,000 years of climate shifts, droughts, and floods. Research papers documented the difficulty. Single herbicide applications achieved partial control at best. Recommendations called for sequential treatments across multiple seasons. Even then, buried tubers survived, waiting for the poison to fade. The irony cuts deep. Industrial monocultures deplete soil, require constant irrigation, and collapse without chemical support. Chufa rebuilds soil structure, survives on rainfall alone, and produces food indefinitely. We spray poison on resilience to protect fragility. And who benefits? Chemical manufacturers sell herbicides. Seed companies sell annual varieties. Fertilizer corporations sell synthetic nutrients. Equipment manufacturers sell machinery designed for crops that need replanting every year. A $40 billion industry was built on the assumption that food production requires perpetual purchases. Chufa threatens that assumption. So Chufa had to disappear. But it survived. The knowledge never died. In Valencia, Spain, Chufa cultivation continued unbroken for 7 centuries. The Regulatory Council of the Denomination of Origin protects traditional production. Over 1,000 tons of chufa are harvested annually for horchata, the drink that Arab traders brought to Iberia 800 years ago. The same tuber, the same process, the same taste. In West Africa, Hausa farmers never stopped growing what they call aya. Markets in Nigeria and Mali sell chufa alongside grain and vegetables. The knowledge survived colonialism, survived the Green Revolution, survived every attempt to replace indigenous crops with imported dependencies. In the past decade, something shifted. Health food stores began stocking tiger nuts. The paleo community discovered them. Researchers published papers on chufa flour as a gluten-free alternative, chufa oil as a heart-healthy fat source, chufa milk as a dairy substitute. What industrial agriculture classified as worthless, nutrition science is rediscovering as exceptional. A 2024 comprehensive review confirmed the ancestral wisdom. Chufa supports cardiovascular health, gut microbiome diversity, and metabolic stability. The food that built pyramids is being validated by peer-reviewed journals. But the infrastructure of suppression remains. Extension bulletins still recommend herbicides. Agricultural policy still subsidizes annual monocultures. The $40 billion chemical industry still profits from teaching farmers to kill what their ancestors cultivated. Every person who learns the truth becomes harder to control. Every garden where chufa grows without inputs proves the industrial narrative false. Every harvest that requires no purchase, no permission, no corporate dependency is an act of quiet rebellion. You can grow what they silenced. Chufa grows in zones 7 through 11. Plant tubers 2 inches deep in sandy or loamy soil after the last frost. Water sparingly. The plants tolerate drought that kills most vegetables. Harvest when leaves yellow in autumn. Dry the tubers in shade for several days. Store them in a cool, dark place. They keep for years. One planting produces tubers for the next season and the season after that. Save what you harvest. Share what you grow. Teach what you learn. 16,000 years of human wisdom cannot be erased by a century of chemical marketing. The pharaohs knew. The Ice Age hunters knew. The Hausa farmers know. And now you know. The seed they silenced is still here, still growing, still waiting for hands willing to dig. If your garden has been struggling lately, if your tomatoes look tired and your flowers refuse to bloom no matter how much fertilizer you add, the problem might not be what you think. It might not be the seeds. It might not be the weather. It might be something invisible happening beneath your feet. Your soil might be dying, or it might already be dead. But here is the good news. You can bring it back to life, and you can do it with 3 simple liquids made from things you probably already have in your kitchen. No expensive products, no complicated chemistry, just ancient wisdom that gardeners have passed down for generations. Today, I want to show you exactly how to do it, step by step, and I promise, if you can make a cup of tea, you can do this. Welcome to Silenced Seeds. Before we dig in, if these old ways of gardening speak to you, the best way to keep this wisdom growing is simple. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share these seeds with someone whose garden could use a little help. Let us start by understanding what we are dealing with. Healthy soil is not just dirt, it is alive. Beneath every handful of good garden soil, billions of microorganisms are working around the clock. Bacteria break down organic matter. Fungi create networks that deliver nutrients to plant roots. Earthworms tunnel through the earth, creating pathways for air and water. This invisible workforce does the heavy lifting so your plants can thrive. But modern gardening has not been kind to these helpers. Years of tilling break up fungal networks. Chemical fertilizers create salt buildup that drives away earthworms. Pesticides kill beneficial bacteria along with the pests. Even well-meaning neglect, leaving soil bare and exposed to sun and rain, can cook the life right out of it. When the microbes disappear, everything changes. Water pools on the surface instead of soaking in. The ground becomes hard as concrete. Nutrients sit locked in the soil where roots cannot reach them. You add more fertilizer, but nothing improves. The plants look pale and weak no matter what you do. This is dead soil, and it is more common than you might think. So how do you know if your soil needs help? There are 3 simple tests you can do right now, and they do not require any special equipment. First, the shovel test. Walk out to your garden with a shovel. Push the blade into the ground using normal pressure. In healthy soil, the blade should slide in smoothly, almost easily. If the shovel bounces back, if you have to stomp on it to make progress, or if it feels like you are trying to dig through a parking lot, your soil is compacted. The life has been squeezed out. Second, the drainage test. Dig a hole about 1 foot deep and 1 foot wide. Fill it with water and let it drain completely. Then fill it again and watch. In healthy soil, the water should drain steadily over several hours. If it disappears in minutes, your soil cannot hold moisture. If it sits there all day like a bathtub, your soil is so compacted that water cannot move through it. Either extreme means trouble. Third, the life test. This one is my favorite. Dig up a shovelful of soil from about 6 inches down. Spread it out on a piece of cardboard or newspaper. Now count the earthworms. In healthy, living soil, you should find 3 to 5 earthworms in every scoop. If you find fewer, or none at all, your soil biology is depleted. The workforce has left the building. If any of these tests revealed problems, do not worry. This is fixable. You are going to fix it with 3 ancient liquids that cost almost nothing to make. The first liquid is rice wash. You have probably been pouring this down the drain your whole life without realizing what you were throwing away. Here is how to make it. Take 1 cup of uncooked rice, any variety works, and put it in a bowl. Add 2 cups of water and swish the rice around with your hand for about 30 seconds. The water will turn cloudy and white. That cloudiness is starch. and it is exactly what you want. Strain out the rice and save the liquid. Now pour that milky water into a jar, cover it loosely with a cloth or paper towel, and let it sit at room temperature for 2 to 3 days. You will know it is ready when it smells slightly sour, like yogurt. That smell tells you beneficial lactic acid bacteria have moved in. When it is ready, dilute it 1 part rice wash to 10 parts water. Pour this mixture directly onto your soil, especially in areas that feel compacted or lifeless. These bacteria are gentle but powerful. They soften hard soil over time, they suppress harmful pathogens, and they kickstart microbial activity that has been dormant. The second liquid is called fermented plant juice, and it is like a multivitamin for your garden. Look around your yard for fast-growing plants. Dandelions work beautifully. So do nettles, clover, or any vigorous weeds. These plants are packed with growth hormones and enzymes because they grow so quickly. We are going to capture that energy. Chop up a handful of these plants and put them in a jar. Add an equal weight of brown sugar. So if you have 1 cup of chopped plants, add 1 cup of brown sugar. Mix it together, press it down, cover loosely, and let it ferment for 5 to 7 days. The sugar draws out the liquid from the plants and preserves all those beneficial compounds. After a week, strain out the plant material. You will have a dark, syrupy liquid that smells sweet and earthy. Dilute this 1 part to 20 parts water, and you can pour it on the soil or spray it directly on leaves. Plants respond almost immediately. Leaves green up, stems strengthen. It is remarkable to watch. The third liquid is compost tea, and this is the most powerful of all. If you have finished compost, the dark, crumbly stuff that smells like forest floor, you have everything you need. Fill a bucket with water and let it sit uncovered for 24 hours so any chlorine can evaporate. Chlorine kills the microbes we are trying to grow. Now fill a mesh bag or an old pillowcase with finished compost, about 2 cups worth. Suspend it in the bucket of water like a giant tea bag. Add a tablespoon of unsulfured molasses to feed the microbes. Here is the important part. You need to add AIR. An inexpensive aquarium bubbler works perfectly. Drop the air stone into the bucket and let it run for 24 hours. The bubbles keep oxygen flowing, which allows beneficial aerobic bacteria and fungi to multiply explosively. When the tea is ready, it will smell earthy and clean, never foul. If it smells bad, something went wrong and you should start over. Good compost tea should have a layer of foam on top. That foam tells you the microbes are thriving. Apply compost tea immediately after brewing. You can pour it directly on soil or spray it on leaves. It repopulates your garden with billions of beneficial microorganisms. These microbes produce a substance called glomalin, a kind of natural glue that binds soil particles together, improving structure and water retention for years to come. Now let me give you a simple seasonal plan so you know when to use each one. In early spring, as the ground begins to warm, start with rice wash. Pour it on your beds to wake up the dormant microbes. A week later, follow with compost tea to repopulate the soil with fresh biology. Through the summer growing season, apply fermented plant juice every 2 weeks. This supports active growth and keeps plants strong and healthy. In autumn, after your harvest, apply compost tea again. It will help break down fallen leaves and garden debris, converting them into nutrients that will feed next year's plants. By the second year, you will notice your soil becoming softer. Earthworms will return. Water will soak in instead of pooling. Plants will grow stronger with less effort from you. The garden begins to take care of itself. This is what makes these liquids different from fertilizer. Fertilizers feed plants directly, but they ignore the microbes. Over time, fertilizer salts actually harm soil biology. The more you use, the more you need. It becomes a cycle of dependency. These ancient liquids work the opposite way. They restore the invisible workforce that nature designed to process nutrients, detoxify harmful compounds, and build healthy soil structure. You are not feeding the plants. You are feeding the system that feeds the plants. And once that system is thriving, it sustains itself. If you are watching this and feeling overwhelmed, take a breath. You do not have to do everything at once. Start with one bed. Start with one plant. Make a jar of rice wash this week and pour it on your poorest patch of soil. See what happens. Gardening should not be a struggle. It should be a partnership. These liquids are your way of shaking hands with the soil and saying, "Let us work together." The ground beneath your feet wants to come alive again. It is waiting for someone to give it a chance.